Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Matt Botil, and I am the Division Chief for the Industrial Strategies Division here at the California Air Resources Board. I want to welcome you all to what I believe is the 13th workshop we've had in a series of workshops on updating the AB32 scoping plan. And this is going to be the third workshop we've had on natural working lands specifically. So I really want to just express my gratitude for everyone spending their afternoon with us as we talk about this important topic, and then just really recognize what an important effort this is for the Air Resources Board and for a number of other state agencies, and for all of you who are joining today. So I'm gonna, oh, I forgot to mention, we are recording today's workshop. So we are going to post the recording a day or two after the workshop. So it will be available if you want to flip back and watch any segments of this. I'm gonna go ahead and hand it off now to Amanda Hansen, who is the Deputy Secretary for Climate Change at the California Natural Resources Agency, to give a little bit of opening framing remarks before we jump back to the CARB staff. So Amanda, take it away.
Thank you, Matt, and thanks to everyone for joining today. I will just say a few quick things because there's a lot to go through, and I'm really excited to make sure everyone gets enough time. So the first thing I wanted to just communicate to everyone is, Secretary Crowfoot and I were just in Scotland with the California delegation, and the elevation of this sector as a critical element of achieving the global climate goals was significant. And so I think, again, California has a real opportunity to contribute to a global challenge, but also to help push the needle and get out ahead in order to support other countries who are interested in using their natural and working lands to achieve carbon neutrality and to build climate resilience. And so I just want to express my appreciation for our really good partnership with CARB and with other agencies that are involved in the natural and working land sector, and also to all of the advocates and land managers who are helping sort of shape and guide our approach. I think the second thing I'd like to just communicate is that, we are really, at the Resources Agency, we are really committed to ensuring that the work that we do, that the investments that we make, that the policies and programs that we are driving on support California's climate goals. And we've recently put out a draft climate smart land strategy, which is really intended to identify what do we need to be doing on our lands in order to support climate action on our landscapes. And then, the work that is going to be underway through the scoping plan is so critical, because depending on, what the modeling tells us and what the target ends up being, we as the Resources Agency are going to have to adjust our approach accordingly in order to support achieving that target. So with really close partnership with CARB and with all of California's land managers, I think we will have our work cut out for us. So I'm going to stop there to allow the real work to start, but just to say thank you to everyone, and especially to our partners at CARB. And I'll hand it back over to you, Matt. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, and I know you've got a busy day today. Thank you for jumping on while you're traveling to give some opening and framing remarks. Really appreciate it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to kind of MC through the day here, but I'm going to hand it off to Jason Gray, who is the chief of the Climate Change Program Evaluation Branch, and he's going to begin the presentation for this afternoon. So Jason, go for it.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks all for being here. I'll cover a few additional opening items for the workshop, and then we'll get into the meat of the presentation. Today, there will be 2 opportunities for public comments and questions. All attendees are in listen-only mode. When we get to a public comment period, attendees can use the raise hand button to indicate that they would like to comment or ask a question, and meeting organizers will unmute attendees so they can be heard. There's also a public comment docket open, and anyone may submit comments at the URL on the Scoping Plan Meeting and Workshop website through December 22nd. We've got a couple additional slides that remind folks of that information. I'd also like to take just a moment to recognize our tribal partners. In recent times, collaboration between tribal nations and the state of California has grown and continues to grow. Each era of California's history has brought about different atrocities against tribal peoples, including land dispossession, discrimination, cultural impacts, and loss of life, to name only a few. To this day, tribes continue to mobilize to preserve their culture and fight for restoration of their rights and lands while forging new roads towards equity and autonomy. Tribal nations and indigenous peoples in California have been sustainably managing lands for generations and are in a unique position to offer insights on ways to protect the environment. We've already greatly benefited from the knowledge and experience of tribes through our workshops for the scoping plan update, as Matt mentioned. This has included tribal representative presenting at our kickoff workshop, public comments, and government-to-government webinars on some of the mapping questions relevant to tribes in our modeling efforts. We thank the tribes for the knowledge they create and share, and will continue working to uplift their efforts to protect, implement, and build upon traditional, ancestral, and ecological knowledge and practices for the betterment of all of California. We hope the meeting today and our ongoing efforts with tribal nations will help better incorporate their viewpoints and the voices of tribal communities in decisions made by the state of California. Next slide, please. All right, let's take a quick moment to explain our oral comment process. The Environmental Justice Advisory Committee will have dedicated time to speak at the end of the presentation. But for this presentation, which has 2 segments, they will also have dedicated time after each segment. During the general comment period, CARB staff will periodically announce the approximate number of hands raised. Speakers cannot cede their time to others, and any Environmental Justice Advisory Committee members should use the dedicated time after presentations to make any comments to ensure they are heard. Please do not email us directly to ask that we give you priority. Additionally, it is our goal to post agendas for workshops at least 48 hours in advance, so we posted this agenda for this workshop on Tuesday afternoon. We also posted the slide materials and draft scenario documents, which we'll discuss later today, yesterday in advance of the workshop. Next slide, please. Today's workshop is 3 hours. We'll start with a recap of the scoping plan and how we are developing a carbon target. Then we'll explain our modeling approach for each natural and working land category. We will then open the floor for comments from the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee and then the public. We'll have a short 5-minute break. And then the second half of the workshop will focus on our draft scoping plan scenarios for natural working lands. Following a description of our scenarios and development process, we'll have an explanation of the draft scenarios, and then we'll open the floor to the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee and the public for additional comments. Finally, we'll let you all know again how to submit written comments, and we'll close out the workshop. Next slide. Briefly, I wanted to orient folks who may not be familiar with CARB or the scoping plan or what this is all about, what it has to do with natural working lands. One of the California Air Resources Board's responsibilities is to be the state government climate change planning agency. The scoping plan is our strategic climate change mitigation plan and roadmap that CARB updates every 5 years. To date, in our climate efforts, for good reason, we've focused on limiting emissions from burning fossil fuels and releases of high global warming potential gases. However, we now have the direction to find a path forward towards carbon neutrality. In planning for carbon neutrality, as opposed to just reducing fossil fuel emissions, all sources of emissions must be balanced by carbon sinks by mid-century, and we must account for the entire state's carbon balance. For this reason, in the current scoping plan update, natural working lands are playing a much larger role. Natural working lands like forests, shrublands, agricultural lands, grasslands, wetlands, and other lands contain California's carbon stocks, and for this reason, we are spending a lot of our resources on estimating the futures of these lands and determining how they contribute or hinder our climate change mitigation efforts. Within the scoping plan, CARB will assess all sectors of California's economy and all natural working lands. Based on direction from the governor and the legislature, CARB is evaluating pathways to achieving carbon neutrality by either 2035 or 2045. This work goes beyond just estimating carbon. For all future scenarios, CARB will also be doing a Health, Economic, and California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, analysis. This all goes before our board to decide on the best pathway for California to achieve carbon neutrality. Regardless of the specific timeline and options the board chooses for achieving carbon neutrality, every potential pathway to carbon neutrality includes a significant reduction in greenhouse gas emissions and fossil fuel use in California over the coming decades. Next slide. Today's workshop builds on several past workshops on natural working lands. Our last one was on July 20th. You can find a recording of that and the slides from this workshop on our Scoping Plan Workshops webpage. There you can also find all of the written comments we've received in response to this workshop. During the previous workshop, CARB presented our National Working Land Carbon Inventory, which will be used to assess progress towards any scoping plan target that gets set. The majority of the past workshop was focused on target development approach, which outlined our literature analysis and modeling, our target setting process, and an overview of the model that we are using for forest and shrublands called RESIS. We explained the difference between a baseline and a business as usual scenario and presented our recommended time period for a baseline. And we also explained generally how we are viewing alternative national working land scoping plan scenarios and how we plan to assess them. At the end of the workshop, we had solicited responses to various questions that we wanted feedback on and invited everyone to submit comments to our docket. Next slide, please. As mentioned earlier, our public comment docket is publicly viewable on our scoping plan workshop webpage. We received 35 written comments, and this is the list summarizing the majority of the comments we received. The comments included a wide range of topics, including actions that people wanted to see in our draft scenarios, improvements we can make to what we are already doing, disagreements with the scientific findings we presented, and modeling data and method suggestions. As you can see, when we go through the public comments, there's a wide range of viewpoints as to the vision of how our national working land should be managed going into the future. For example, some people want more forest management, while others wanted less. In general, however, every letter wanted decisive action to be taken to mitigate the negative impacts of climate change. No public comment told us that we should not be aggressively pursuing climate action in our national working lands. Next slide, please. This is a figure from our last workshop, which shows the general process that CARB is taking to develop a carbon target for our natural working lands. I'm going to spend a few minutes going through this material as a refresher. In this diagram, 3 hypothetical natural working land alternative scenarios are depicted. Each natural working land alternative scenario has statewide and regional policy objectives in the blue boxes, a mix of management strategies in the green boxes, which lead to ecological outcomes through our modeling process. Then this feeds into the mechanisms pathway, which will determine the policies needed to elicit the identified change in management strategies, which will estimate the cost of a scenario. Then, when CARB is done with all the analysis that underlies each of these boxes, all of the alternatives analyzed will be assessed with our state agency partners and presented during a public process. Staff, based on state agency and public feedback, will ultimately propose a scenario and natural working land target to our board for inclusion in the final scoping plan. Next slide, please. As we did in our first workshop, let's talk about definitions so we're all on the same page as we go about explaining this process today. The first term to define is policy objective. A policy objective is a jurisdictional goal on future outcomes from the land. This should be the ends that are desired, not how those ends can be met. Examples of policy objectives could be decreasing wildfire emissions, or increasing carbon stocks, or increasing water availability. Next, a management strategy is an overall approach to on-the-ground land management, including where, when, and what type of actions occur that will meet the objective. Examples can be thought of in terms of how a landscape, not a single plot of land, is managed. For instance, within a watershed, management strategies could be to thin 100 acres every 3 years, or prescribe burn 400 acres per year, or clear cut 80 acres every 2 years. Next, an action is an on-the-ground activity that alters the landscape. A management strategy is made up of individual actions. Examples of actions include thinning, clear cuts, prescribed burning, crop covering, or cover cropping, planting, etc. A mechanism pathway is a portfolio of levers that California can use to elicit desired changes in management strategies, legislation, incentives, regulations, etc. More specific examples could be ecosystem services markets, conservation easements, biomass products and fuels incentives, subsidies, etc. And finally, a national working land alternative scenario is a set of policy objectives, management strategies, and a mechanisms pathway. Policy objectives, management strategies, and action are outlined here because they are the focus of today's workshop. And now I'll hand the presentation over to Dr. Adam Moreno, who is leading our national working land modeling and scenario efforts. Thanks, Adam.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Okay, so to assess the effectiveness co-benefits and consequences of management strategies that are devised to fulfill the objective of a scenario, we need to use ecological models that simulate how ecosystems will respond to changes in management under climate change. And in this section of the scoping plan, we are focused on the ecosystem carbon within the natural and working land category, or all the categories listed here. This work does not assess animal husbandry, transportation, energy use, or anything to do with the processing or any chemical inputs that may occur on these lands. Those aspects of land management are dealt with in other sectors of the scoping plan. Okay, so models in general are used to assess the potential implications of our actions before we actually do them in real life, right? So just as a civil engineer uses a model to assess the safety of a bridge before they build it, so too do we need to assess the implications of our large-scale actions before we take them. Models here are computer programs that bring together all of the best available and latest science about ecosystems to make our best estimate as to what the future will bring on our lands. Models are always improving as new science comes in, and ecological models are never perfect. Primarily because ecological systems are extremely complex and operate on multiple scales, from the cellular level up to global scales. So invariably, no model can capture all of the nuance that exists in an ecosystem. For this reason, it is important to know what your question is and your purpose for modeling, so that you can utilize or develop models that can best meet your needs. Natural and working lands are comprised of various types of ecosystems that function in very different ways. Because all of these systems are so different, CARB is using different models for these different natural and working land categories. Yeah, shown here. So sorry we didn't advance the slide earlier. And as I explained in our last workshop, modeling is very complex and resource intensive. And for this reason, we've had to prioritize how we will utilize resources to model all lands in California. So for this reason, you'll see in the coming slides, all of the natural and working land types shown here have varying levels of complexity in their modeling, which are ranked here actually from most complex at the top for forest, shrublands, and grasslands to the least complex in deserts. However, keep in mind, please, that CARB is committed to improving our modeling in all natural and working lands with time. So even after this scoping plan update is complete, CARB will work on enhancing our modeling capabilities. Additionally, CARB cannot do all of this modeling on our own. Several great contractors are helping us with various aspects of this modeling work. I don't have time to mention them all here, but know that CARB really appreciates all of your work. Next slide. Now I'm going to briefly explain CARB's approach to modeling for each natural and working land type, starting here with forests, shrublands, and grasslands. And these land cover categories are grouped together here because they are all being evaluated using the Regional Hydrological and Ecological Simulation System, or RHESIS. This is by far the most complex model that CARB is utilizing, as it is a process-based biogeochemical model that also includes climate change, dynamic fire, drought-induced mortality, and hydrology. A biogeochemical model, which this is, refers to a model that simulates all of the underlying processes that a vegetative ecosystem has to function. So these processes include photosynthesis, respiration, decomposition, etc., all of the different processes. So instead of just using, for example, a generic growth rate function for trees to simulate how they grow through time, a biogeochemical model would take the daily temperature, precipitation, CO2 concentrations, soil and site conditions, and the amount of sunlight in the day given the time of year, and put all of that information through an algorithm that would estimate the photosynthesis for the day, the respiration that would occur for the day in that system, and all of that together would then estimate the growth for a particular day. And in this way, this type of model can estimate the impacts of climate conditions that have never existed in the past, as we are beginning to see with climate change. All right, our current method using this model is to model representative watersheds throughout California and to extrapolate the watershed scale to the statewide scale using machine learning. And I explained a little bit of this in the previous workshop. Management is also modeled in this sector and will be driven by statistics on our business as usual management, which is derived by land fire treatment and disturbance rasters and processed through a CARB-derived land management model. And the land management model takes the statistics from CARB's BAU, or business as usual assessment, and then derives essentially a probability-based model that creates treatment maps for the 7 treatment categories that are shown here. Every ownership throughout the state and regional combination across the state is modeled differently and will have specific management strategies unique to them. Using the management model, we can also adjust the treatments we want to have on the landscape to fit particular scenarios that we want to model. So we can change the frequency of treatments, sizes of treatments, how clustered or dispersed they are, things like that. For each natural and working land category, I will provide a slide here in the slide deck that includes some of the primary input and output data that will be derived through this modeling. For forests, shrublands, and grasslands, carbon stocks and fluxes, water availability, and wildfire are the primary outputs that the model will provide us. And to arrive at these outputs, we need to feed the model a number of data sets on management actions, as well as climate and ecological and environmental data. You can see these slides for your review on our scoping plan workshop webpage. I'm not going to go into every data set in detail here. So on to agriculture. Agricultural lands, yes, next slide. Agricultural lands will be modeled in 2 different ways. Annual croplands will be modeled using DayCent, which is another biogeochemical process-based model. For perennial crops, CARB has developed an orchard carbon model that can simulate the carbon in most perennial crops in California. And this model is based on CARB's method for assessing perennial cropland carbon in our natural and working land carbon inventory. And this method is allometric based, which just means that we are utilizing models that take in the age and type of an orchard, and through an algorithm, this derives the carbon estimate for an acre of some orchard. And then this model uses these principles to model a non-spatial statewide estimate for perennial cropland carbon, giving different levels of planting and orchard retention. Rangelands, which is another subcategory of agricultural lands, is covered in our shrubland and grassland modeling. And so that utilizes rhesus, actually. So next slide. Here are the inputs and outputs of the ag modeling for both perennial and annual agriculture. Carbon stock changes will be driven primarily by choices we make on future management actions and the effect of water and climate change that can occur through time. Next slide. Settlements include the vegetation in urban and rural areas, as well as vegetation around roads and other infrastructure. Urban forests will be modeled using a carb-derived aspatial urban forest carbon model. And this model is empirically based, which means that we take historic trends of statewide urban forest carbon from our natural and working lands inventory, relate that to climate and investment variables, which we have for the future, and estimate future carbon off of this relationship. Rural forests are being assessed in a couple different ways. Rural forests that are not directly around structures and not within incorporated jurisdictions are covered by rhesus in the forest and grassland and shrubland category. The amount of carbon that must be removed around structures to achieve 100% compliance in defensible space pursuant to state regulation will be assessed using high resolution tree cover, structure, and parcel data. In this way, we can see how settlement carbon balances out as we increase canopy cover in urban areas and decrease canopy cover in high-risk fire WUI areas. For settlements, currently we can only assess carbon. So that is to say we cannot assess the co-benefits of increased or decreased tree cover. The urban forest carbon model currently is not spatially explicit. So again, we cannot really assess the co-benefits of increasing tree canopy cover more in some places than in others. Next slide. Again, here are the inputs and outputs for settlement carbon modeling, which you can review at your leisure with the slides provided on our scoping plan workshop webpage. Next slide, please. Okay, so many different types of wetlands exist in California. Most riparian zones, that is to say vegetation along rivers and mountain meadows, are covered by rhesus. CARB's land management model can actually alter management specifically around riparian zones, so we can manage those lands slightly differently than non-riparian areas. For delta and coastal wetlands, CARB has developed an IPCC Tier 1 empirical model. And this just means that we are using data showing what the baseline land use change is for these wetlands, and then using IPCC, that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, emissions factors for these wetlands, and then multiplying those emission factors by the amount of area that is in one land use type or another, given the year that we're assessing. And we can estimate annual emissions from wetlands. We can then change the restoration or conversion rate to assess the emissions implications associated with conversion or restoration. This model is focused on the effects of land use change more than anything. Next slide, please. And again, here are the inputs and outputs for wetland modeling for you to review. Next slide, please. CARB has developed a land use-based model to estimate the impacts of development and or conversion on desert carbon. The baseline carbon stocks in these systems are determined by CARB's natural and working lands inventory. the U.S. Geological Survey, or the USGS, modeled future land use change for the forest climate assessment. And that drives the changes in our model in future carbon in deserts. The carbon model will decrease carbon in deserts as land use encroaches on these systems. In this model, the maximum carbon that can exist in the desert is the carbon that exists in our baseline. And only through land use change will that carbon change. Next slide. Here again are the inputs and outputs for the desert carbon model. Next slide, please. In addition to these ecological modeling exercises, CARB is also potentially quantifying various other things that will contribute to our assessment of scenarios. The health impacts from wildfire and prescribed burning emissions in forests, shrublands, and grasslands may be assessed. The economic assessment on the costs of actions in all natural and working land types may be done. And where possible, co-benefits will be assessed. The extent of the co-benefits assessment varies based on the modeling approach. So for example, RESIS is the most complex model and will provide us with additional data on water and fire impacts for forests, shrublands, and grasslands. For other landscape types, we welcome feedback on ways to expand our analysis, but would also flag that we are bound by resource and time constraints, so any supplemental analysis would need to align with the data inputs and outputs of the modeling efforts that I just described. All right, next slide. Okay, so now that I've laid out a high-level overview of our modeling approach, we would like to open it up for comments from our Environmental Justice Advisory Committee. So committee members, if you could raise your hands, we will call on you.
Yeah, and Kevin, it looks like we can't hear you. I was going to see if you were able to jump on, but if you're able to unmute your mic, that would be good.
So there we go. Mic open now?
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. I guess I jumped. I don't know if anybody else from the EJ side has their hand up, but a couple of things. Thank you. That last presentation, I got to tell you, was just a little overwhelming on the technical side, but really quite interesting. So from the environmental justice standpoint, I think a couple of things sort of jump right out to me, and some are related basically on which communities we're talking about where these issues exist. So in the forest lands, where again we have a lot more poverty than people understand, and a lot of especially members of the various nations who are living and affected by these policies and often not part of the solution. You know, the literature suggests strongly that we be able to demonstrate what different types of forest plantings might look like as the climate evolves, as we see it happening in front of us. I think it's pretty well known at this point, but I'll restate it, that replanting, say, in conifers may not be our best choice, right? Hardwoods have been shown to sequester almost twice as much carbon, so we need to actually a little more than twice as much. So they have broader leaves, they grow more slowly, but they put out more foliage per year as they grow than a conifer does. So it's, you know, it really makes sense that where feasible, we need to do an assessment on the ground of what kind of treatment we're going to replace the forest with as we go back in and replant. We tend to go in and blindly replant whatever was there, is sort of the standard. We would argue that that needs to change, but again, that should be discussed with those local communities who are historically entitled and living in those lands, and others who may be living there to talk about what that might look like. Speaking about that, of course, encroachment of human beings in the forest is a critical issue, and I think the scoping plan should speak to that and send some kind of messaging out to local land use agencies that, you know, they're cutting their own throats with this approach. When we come down into the flatlands, especially in the San Joaquin Valley where I live and the issues that we have here, it's obvious that what we're putting in the ground and planting as a crop is really critical. So things like no-till approaches in between plantings for row crops are critical so that the ground is not left arid during that time. Many farmers have already adopted this, but we need to be able to understand how those approaches reduce or sequester carbon and how much. And I didn't pick up from this that is the models are presently able to estimate that. Please correct me if I'm wrong once I finish my comments. But I think it's, if not, that's an embarrassment that needs to be fixed. Because again, that's also recommended by the Department of Agriculture. See, pretty much every ag agency makes these same recommendations to farmers across the country now. For reasons other than simply climate, it's also good for pest control and the crops in general. So you have a minimum amount of time where you've got, again, empty dirt with no carbon collecting type of surface going on. If we're going to plant trees in the valley, we've tended to lean toward almonds. Citrus also collects a lot of carbon, but probably walnuts, again, being a hardwood. And in the North Valley, you see originally the major nut crops here were walnuts, and you see them everywhere up there, and you really can tell because the leaves are huge, big, beautifully crowned trees. And again, we can make recommendations to agriculture through the scoping plan as to selecting crops that hopefully generate the same amount or close to the same amount of revenue, but are more likely to be carbon sequestering. And that way those communities don't lose their economic driver, but are able to participate in this same goal in some way or another. So that's that for the ag areas. When we're talking about urban areas, again, the second question that you can answer after I'm done is, you mentioned that you weren't able to resolve the carbon sequestration results of urban greening, of increasing the amount. Was it just one model that didn't do that? The REPAS or whatever the hell it was called. It was a new acronym to me, but and there's another one that does, but that's a huge gap in our knowledge. And as again, those areas are generally ripe for planting the best kind of trees to sequester carbon. You know, we need to be looking at, from a policy perspective, and assuming that there is a significant amount of carbon that we could be sequestering if we were to utilize all the open space in these cities, incentives going to cities, both for planning and long-term funding to both expand and maintain these suburban and urban forests. It's not enough to just give money to the city to plant a tree. They've got to take care of that tree for forever, basically. So how do we help them be successful in that? And I think this is, again, the scoping plan can make these recommendations, but we should also have some recommendations to go along with it that go to the governor and the legislature as to how, how this would be funded. Rooftop plantings, again, in large urban areas, we've got plenty of flat roofs out there. Instead of populating, especially the tallest ones, with solar to generate energy, I would advocate moving to wind. And that way you could have tree plantings on those roofs as well. And again, providing incentives. But when we make these investments and we do this urban greening, this needs to occur in communities that have been left behind by the existing urban greening. You can tell where you are and how much investment has been in that community, and whether it's a low-income community, by driving from one end of a city to another and just noticing the amount of trees that are in neighborhoods and local major boulevards. You can certainly do that here in Fresno and in Bakersfield and in Modesto. you know exactly where you are just looking around at the greenery. So that needs to end. And before we do anything, we need to create equity in that investment. And in fact, put the majority initial investment into those communities so that they look as good, if not better, than their counterparts, because God knows that they need some green stuff around them. It also benefits in the fact that it filters the air, keeps the PM exposures at least limited, and decreases sound for those folks who are living next to major freeways and highways and high use secondary roads. So that's about it. I didn't want to speak for a long time. I just wanted to be as concise as I could. Thank you for the time, by the way. And if you could answer those two questions, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I really appreciate it. I wanted to touch on one of your closing comments there with respect to the deployment of urban forestry. And so, I think this is also one of the things why we've got these partnerships across state agencies that are so important, because as we work through these modeling efforts to establish what our targets are for natural working lands, the implementation then becomes really critical, right? It's as the urban tree canopy grows, as we make investments in urban forestry projects, how do we do that in a way that is really targeted at communities that need that expansion, that can also benefit from that additional shading, the air quality benefits, and there's a really pivotal equity component of the investment and the implementation of the strategies that we're trying to reinforce are needed here through the modeling effort.
And sustainable, of course, and sustainable. Don't ever forget to use the word is sustainable.
I tend to stay away from that one, but all right.
I don't blame.
I'm gonna ask Adam to jump on. He's gonna answer the two questions you had on the modeling pieces, and then I do know that we have another member of the Environmentalist Advisory Committee who's got a hand raised. We'll hit it off.
Yeah, real quick. So your first question was about agricultural modeling, and if we can model changes in management that would alter like how much land is in fallow land, things like that.
Well,
and
not fallow, but fallow and arid. So it's fallow if there's not a crop planted in it, but in a no-till strategy, the weeds then are allowed to grow. So it ends up being covered with greenery anyway. It's just not the original crop. And specific areas tend to grow certain types of weeds. And so this has been a soil management tool for many, many, many years, and a pest management tool. So I think you'd have to talk to, the ag experts in that area, and you can certainly find them through the department and get, a little bit more information on that. But yeah, that's what just to be clear.
Right. So you're talking about cover cropping, essentially.
Right. And you don't plant those weeds; they just grow.
Yeah, so yeah, we are modeling cover cropping and various other healthy soils practices that that we in CDFA have been working on. And then your second question was about urban forest modeling, and yeah, so we are modeling the change of forest canopy in urban areas.
Okay.
The only thing we can't currently do is make that spatially explicit. So we have a statewide aspatial model that will estimate changes in tree canopy
resolution, right? You can't get the resolution down to a specific urban area. Is that what you're telling me?
Right. Okay. So when it comes to where our investments would go and things like that, like Matt was saying, that will come into play during our mechanisms pathway discussion, which is another workshop. Actually, so
can you at least calculate the amount that we have versus the amount of what we would need to get a certain amount of sequestration?
Need in terms of what?
The amount we have statewide versus, does somebody know the amount we have statewide to be able to feed that in there so that you could say, well, if we increase that total amount of acreage.
So our natural and working lands carbon inventory has an urban forest inventory, urban forest carbon inventory. And that directly feeds into this model.
Okay, and then so you could then put in a higher number, so to speak, and give a target where that where that investment was would be more or less irrelevant.
Yeah, where that
To the
investment,
model I'm talking about, right?
yeah, for the modeling, yeah, where the investment would take place is irrelevant. The model cannot, adjust that, but you can say we want to invest X amount and we're going to do some other water use practices, and the model takes all of that into account.
Right. You get what I'm thinking. When I think of these models, I think of all of them. And I think of columns moving up and down, right? And one is the idea of using something what I consider more really speculative and kind of ridiculous in my mind, given the level of technology like sequestration. So whatever we've got left over, someone's going to say, we've got to sequester that. So we're always going to be balancing. There was a slide early on that kind of showed that with those columns. And so with this, it's like, how big do we have to build the columns of natural sequestration to avoid having to move to something artificial, right? That is, in again, my mind, just my opinion, not really sustainable over the generations. So, that's kind of the way I'm thinking about it. Am I thinking about it correctly?
Well, so we're thinking about it as if it's like, how do we want to manage our lands? And then the modeling will assess what is the carbon outcome from that.
Well, this is
So
just
we're not
one
starting with the carbon target and then figuring out how to achieve that necessarily. We're saying, let's start with our vision of the future, the objectives we want to meet, or through our natural and working lands, and then devise a management strategy that achieves those objectives. And then we model those management strategies and see what the implications are from that strategy.
But we do have a target. I mean, the governor has set a target. We have legislation that sets a target, right? And a date for carbon neutrality, which is a fixed figure in MMT of CO2. So we do have a target, but it's not just coming. I mean, the pieces of it aren't just coming from this model. I get that. I'm saying I think of all the models together as like there's one big column for natural working lands. What will its contribution be? And then one for the energy system. What will its decarbonizing its contribution be? And that's kind of how I think of all of these, as those columns going up and down. So we need to build enough into each of those columns to not have to resort to what some would consider, false solutions, or at least untenable, or whatever, however you want to look at it. There's other more extreme ways to sequester carbon. Most of us feel that if we can get it out of the existing systems without resorting to that, we'd be a lot better off because it's more sustainable and leads us to a zero carbon future eventually. But anyway, that's just the way I'm thinking about it. And that's within each of those columns, like natural working lands, you've got multiple columns you're moving up and down. But you guys showed the original slide, not the previous presenter, but the one before, that actually had a slide with those columns, and two or three of them included, at least two of them included sequestration. So that made me think of that. Just letting you know.
Yeah, no, I think broadly where you're headed right with this, Kevin, is describing kind of how we're thinking about carbon neutrality. We have these end dates that we're evaluating towards in terms of 2035 or 2045 carbon neutrality, and then we've also been doing this effort that you're very familiar with on the energy side to be able to figure out what are some of the energy end uses, what are some of the emissions that will remain at either one of those endpoints, depending on the different mix of kind of policies and strategies that are deployed on the energy side. And so we've got another effort here on natural working lands to kind of ask that similar question, depending on what kind of approaches you take on natural working lands, what kinds of emissions or sequestration could you expect from natural working lands?
Right.
And we need to be able to look at all of this stuff together to be able to also kind of inform our broad strategy towards carbon neutrality. So I do know that Luis has had his hand up for some time now, so I want to get to Luis, if that's okay.
Sorry, Luis. Of course.
Yeah, Luis, if you're still there, it'd be great to have you hop on and give your perspective. Thanks.
Hi, Luis. I've unmuted you. So there you go.
Yeah, hi. I don't know if I'm on the webcam or not, but I don't have to be necessarily. Can you hear me?
We can, yeah.
Okay. So I just had a couple of points here, and I apologize I wasn't able to hear from the beginning to end, but just a couple of sound bites. And one is just want to point out that it would be great to see a consideration of a tree canopy in desert areas. Not every desert area is hot and humid. Areas like the Coachella and Imperial are predominantly agriculture. A tree canopy, especially trees that wouldn't be excessively consuming of water, would be very helpful to reduce energy cost. And that's because it is a dry heat. Trees placed near that can provide shade for public health purposes, for people to be able to not just have shade, but also in structures where it could reduce the use of energy. So I'm not sure to what extent that has been studied or even considered. But that's one. I'll read the rest. I don't know if this falls within this conversation, but with all the fires that have been happening I don't know, seems like it's been happening for a couple decades now, at least from my recollection. The desert area is always seen as a dumping ground for these wood chips, for biomass, for burning to create biomass energy, and for composting. And in fact, these piles of wood chips are typically not managed well, and so just the transport alone and the storage, they end up just burning twice. We've had some real critical fires that have gone on for weeks, and I suspect that these wood chips are coming from forest areas, managed by the state. And the last one is agricultural burning. I happen to see a couple of mentions there about prescribed burns, and I'm very optimistic of policies that are now in place, covering the San Joaquin Central Valley, if I recall it correctly. I'm not sure what the boundaries or where the jurisdictions that these new policies will apply, but areas like the Coachella and Imperial continue to burn as part of the agricultural practices, and I'm sensitive to their needs, but I think that more than prescribed burns, when you have these burns as part of the industry, I mean, if you have that type of crop and it's profitable at the time, you're going to have an abundance of crops that will require more burning, right? So the market does play a role in how much burning that happens, but it's always that, well, it's the state that has the authority, and then the state sometimes, well, it's the locals who can control it. And but I really would like to see it as part of these conversations. That's all I had.
Thanks, Luis. Appreciate the input. So a couple of points to kind of discuss there on the urban forestry and tree canopy pieces. So I think this is kind of similar to what we were hearing from Kevin as well, in terms of what we're looking to do is identify how much should the urban tree canopy change in California over time, considering both water and climatic conditions, and that would obviously give us some information about carbon sequestration in that urban tree canopy across the entire state. And if we're able to set a target, whether across all natural working lands or specific to one, kind of category like increases in urban tree canopy, we would then look to our sister agencies and kind of the locals in terms of implementation, like where do you deploy specific tree species, which communities, what kind of specific additional benefits could come from it. And I will point out that, you know, we have seen some of this play out in the past with respect to investment in urban forestry projects from things like our climate investments and going into specific communities and local and regional urban foresters tailoring this different tree species to those communities once they are, you know, once they take in those dollars and are able to do those tree planting activities. And so the question that we have before us that we're trying to evaluate is, you know, what should that change look like in the urban tree canopy between now, 2035 and 2045, and we're going to get into some of that as part of like the second segment of this workshop, where we start talking about like modeling different scenarios for particularly for urban forestry, but for all of these categories that Adam is discussing in terms of the modeling framework. You raised some important points on forest residues and ag residues, and you know, I think again we'll talk a little bit more about this in the next segment, but you know, similarly, as we discuss what are the different scenarios that we should be modeling for natural working lands, one of those questions is, you know, what are the practices that we should be deploying on forest lands or ag lands, and what are the outcomes of deploying those practices at certain levels? So more forest management, maybe that results in more forest residue available, and then there's going to be conversations about like how should that be utilized. And so what we're trying to model right now is the carbon effects, the flux of carbon that happens as you move those knobs on the different management strategies, and part of that is going to be in terms of like what forest residues get produced as a result. And on the ag side, similarly, part about the utilization of any kind of ag residues that may come from changing in cropping practices and changing in ag practices, and you know, what other kind of strategies could the state consider for utilization of those as we move forward on things like we're seeing in the San Joaquin Valley with a phase out of agricultural burning. All right, it looks like we might have one other member of the EJAC, Matt Holmes, who is the proxy for Dylan Delvo for Little Manila Rising. And so, Matt, if you wanted to hop on, happy to take your feedback or questions.
Yeah, great. Just appreciated your comments there at the end about the evaluation of species selection, looking at the future climate, and wanted to make sure you guys knew about the 2100 study designed by the UC Cooperative Extension Urban Foresters, Igor Lacan and Dan McBride. I don't know his first name, but they basically took 15 or 18 different cities across California and developed climate model proxies for each other, and have pretty good data on what cities are going to look like in 2100, and have developed appropriate tree lists for the cities where they are now. So Stockton has a Barstow future in 2100, much like Berkeley has an Antioch future in 2100. So there is research out there that can help people look at those different trees, and Kevin was spot on when he was talking about hardwoods and broadleafs, and so there are some solutions there. The other thing I want to say about the way Kevin's thinking about this, which is the way that I'm thinking about this, is that I wish that natural solutions got the same best case scenario modeling that sometimes engineering solutions get. You know, I know it's easier to calculate how a machine works than how a community works with a local government. I've been doing urban forestry projects for 10 years, and yeah, there's a lot of loss and efficiency there. But there's also a lot of co-benefits that come from deep investment in urban forestry and in other natural and public lands that result in jobs and addressing the wealth gap and addressing the public health gap, which are major, you know, financial detractors from the communities that we work in. And so I haven't seen in the pathways modeling an appreciation for the economic co-benefits of investment in these types of nature-based solutions in communities that, as Kevin rightly pointed out, are absolutely facing inequitable futures because of clear de jure racist policies of the past, the tree canopy lacunarity gap map looks exactly like the redlining map or the U.S. Maritime Commission racist maps that designed our housing. So there's real potential to build equity into emphasizing this component of a nature-based solution that has additional economic benefits, and someday our economic benefits will be valued as much as the market analyses of I guess more traditionally thought of economic interests. But my question, so that was just sort of soapboxing about forestry and public lands. And I'm sorry if this is coming up in the next section, and I'm happy to take an answer offline, but I live on the Delta, and it's the largest, most significant carbon sink in California. And it's just quivering on collapse because the State Water Resources Board likes to put out voluntary agreements, and people don't voluntarily lose money, and agriculture keeps sucking all the water out and keeps really undermining the Delta's ability to do its job, which is to transmit nitrogen to our forests and to sequester carbon in its muddy bottom. I'm not seeing a focus in this work, or I have not seen a focus in this work, and I would be shocked to find one at this point, having spent so much time discussing this with you all. But I haven't seen anything that really looks at the special potential of this estuary and what an investment in the working lands here could look like in both building climate resilience, because I'm in a community that's going to lose 17,000 parcels of housing in a single levee breach. And our levees could be restored, and they could be amended with significant green infrastructure benefits design, and they could be sequestering carbon, protecting communities, cleaning water, sheltering fish, and building resiliency in dozens of categories. If this nature-based solution for something that nobody makes money off of, that just normal people benefit from, got the same best case scenario modeling that things like carbon capture, utilization, and storage seem to have gotten. That's just, I wanted to raise the flag over a special region in California that takes special beatings in climate change, and how it has a potential to help be a part of the problem. And this goes back to that granularity in the model that we need for it to be relevant, because without that geographic granularity and demographic granularity, we really can't fully appreciate co-benefits. And we're always hit with, market signals are a reason why we can't be bold in some of these plans. And I think, I don't know, it feels like a gap in the knowledge, and it could be more a gap in my literacy, and I'm fully prepared to admit that. But I think residents in my region and people who think and fight like me are really concerned about what seems to be a bias and a preference for engineering solutions over investing in people and communities. So with that, I'll climb up. Thank you, though. This has been great and enlightening.
Yeah, great. Thanks for the comment. Real quick, I'll just touch upon this, upon the Delta. We fully recognize how special the Delta is here in California, and its unique contribution to carbon and all sorts of co-benefits that the whole state relies upon. And we do have a model that is focused specifically on the Delta. Part of the issue is that it is a very complex ecosystem, and we need more data to be able to model all of the nuance that exists in that system. So we have something, we are doing our best to model restoration and conservation of the Delta. And we actually look forward to big, bold ideas. We're not stopping. You'll see in the second section of this workshop, in the scenarios, that's where we can have all these big, bold ideas that you're referring to. So I'll just stop there. Go ahead,
awesome, Adam. That's great news. And I think, lots of people have good ideas about the Delta. There's like 7 agencies that are supposed to protect them, but only one of them really matters, and it's the Department of Water Resources that gets to drain it whenever it wants to. And so there is sort of a hierarchy of orgs in the Delta, and hopefully the scoping plan and the emergency of climate can elevate the benefit of, letting rivers run free. So thank you for acknowledging that.
All right, thanks, Matt. Thanks, Adam. So I do see that we have one other proxy for an EJAC member. I believe Colin Miller has his hand raised for on behalf of Martha. So Colin, if you want to hop on real quickly, and then we do need to move along to public comments. So Colin.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I don't know if you can see me. I don't think so. It seems like my camera's not working, but can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Colin Miller. I use he and they pronouns. I am with Environmental Justice Solutions, working as a proxy and working with Marta Dina Arguello, Executive Director of Physicians for Social Responsibility in Los Angeles, and one of the 3 co-chairs for the EJAC. And so I appreciate the conversation thus far and the comments made by the EJAC members who have spoken so far already. And I do want to point out that it is, it is still true that the EJAC still does not have a California indigenous representative from a tribal nation sitting on the EJAC. And that is a problem, especially as we are continuing to delve into the sector of natural and working lands. I'm glad to hear, from CARB that you're open to big and bold ideas, but I think it's really critical that big and bold ideas really center and include the traditional ecological knowledge that is uniquely held by California indigenous Native people and tribal nations in order to inform a truly ecologically based natural and working land strategy that advances equity as well as climate resilience that my colleague Matt Holmes was speaking about. This is really critical. It should not be sidelined, and issues such as, or solutions such as cultural burning practices that are a really good example of traditional ecological knowledge held by Native people in California that have been used for generations and that were suppressed by settler colonial land management practices is now coming to the fore and being understood as a viable and actually an essential solution to prevent the kinds of catastrophic wildfires that we've seen in recent years and which have wiped out a lot of the progress from other sectors. So this is really essential both for keeping Californians safe and also to have any hope of restoring ecological balance to our California landscape, both with people and with the land itself. So I'd love to hear from CARB. Are you considering traditional ecological knowledge held by California Native people and indigenous tribal nations in informing your natural and working lands strategy? And what's the update on ensuring the inclusion of indigenous people from California on the EJAC itself? Thank you.
Hi, thanks, Colin, and thanks for that comment. Yes, as I referenced up front, we've been working with tribal nations and really working to make sure that there's participation of tribal nations in this process since the beginning. We'll continue to do so, and we have a lot of material we've shared with our tribal listservs and participation in our kickoff workshops and ongoing consultations, and invite any tribal nation that would like to engage in a formal consultation to follow up with us on that process. And I think just like you, we look forward to seeing the EJAC with the tribal participation on the EJAC itself. So we agree with you, and thanks.
Thanks, Jason. I just want to emphasize that according to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, consultation is actually not enough, that free, prior, and informed consent is actually the bar that is critical when it comes to any kind of projects or investments that will have the potential to negatively impact Indigenous people. That's United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and the need for free, prior, and informed consent, which is very distinct from merely consultation. Just wanted to offer that. That's a good bar to meet.
Thanks, appreciate that.
All right, so we are a little behind on the agenda, but I wanted to flag that we are going to move to public Q&A. And one of the things I wanted to mention too is that we were hoping to kind of focus on our questions on the modeling approach that Adam described in his presentation. After this segment, we're going to take just a short break, and then we're going to go in and talk a little bit more about how do we craft scenarios to model for natural working lands, and that's where we start having these conversations about like the magnitude of specific actions on different land types, and we can also have some discussions about the mechanisms to conduct those actions. And so I'm looking at my list right now, and I know hands kind of go up and down, and it looks like we have about 5 or 6 participants with their hands raised. Alex, do you want to call on the first commenter?
Sure. I have Julia Levin up first. I'll unmute you, and you can go ahead and unmute yourself and make your comment.
Hi, this is Julia Levin with the Bioenergy Association of California. I want to thank you all. This is a really important area that has been neglected for too many years, and it's great to see it, the prominence that you're giving it now, and that you're hopefully fully incorporating it into the climate change scoping plan. I know it's really complicated, but we really appreciate you moving forward in this direction. It's absolutely critical to meet our climate goals and other environmental sustainability goals. I do have 2 sort of overarching suggestions for the scenarios planning for natural and working lands. The first relates to black carbon and fires. And I think it's probably past time to move away from the word wildfire, or at least to distinguish between what are truly wild, as in naturally caused wildfires, which means lightning strikes, versus man-made fire. And the reason that is so significant is because state law, SB 1383, requires a 50% reduction in anthropogenic black carbon. And it's really critical in a 5-year climate change scoping plan that will be adopted next year, meaning it'll go through 2027, that we differentiate between natural fires and human-caused fires, whether it's a fire that behaves in a wild way, as in these catastrophic large fires, or controlled burns and prescribed fire. But anything that is caused by human beings or human infrastructure has to be categorized as anthropogenic black carbon emission sources. And we're going to have to plan for that 50% reduction to meet the requirements of SB 1383. So I really urge the Air Board and other agencies working with you to begin to separate out anthropogenic black carbon emissions from fire versus truly wild or naturally caused fires. My second strong and overarching recommendation is everywhere we can, we need to move toward life cycle analyses. We throw out and we use a lot of different terms like compost, bioenergy, biomass utilization. These are very, very large categories. There are a lot of alternatives to open burning of ag waste, or wildfire and pile and burn of forest waste. We really need to assess the life cycle carbon emissions from each of the alternatives and make sure that we're incentivizing the lowest carbon alternatives possible in each category. I mean, even I'll just speak for bioenergy. There's a very wide range of emissions, depending on the technology used and the end use and the transportation distances, all sorts of things. We need to continue to drive down emissions, and we need to model accurately what the emissions reductions will be from each potential alternative end use. So I really encourage you both to account for human-caused black carbon emissions, and to start looking at everything on a life cycle carbon emissions basis. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thanks for the comments. Real quick, just to respond to the wildfire issue, natural versus human caused. CARB just put out a report for public comment on our natural and working lands carbon inventory page. I think it's on the wildfire emissions inventory portion of the inventory page, that addresses or assesses the historical wildfire in California, and then kind of relates it back to our current condition. So that kind of touches upon that topic. So I would invite you to go to that report and read it and comment on it as you wish. So yeah, thanks for the comments. Let's take the next one.
Great, thank you, Adam. Next I have Evan Edgar, and after that we'll have Chuck Mills, and then Gary Hughes and Muriel Strand. So Evan Edgar, I've unmuted you.
Thank you for the workshop today. My name is Evan Edgar. I'm the engineer for the California Compost Coalition. A lot of good information. And we talked about the vision of the future today, but we already talked about that in a reference document back in January 2019, the draft Natural Working Lands Climate Change Implementation. This was a 2-year process with a lot of stakeholders by Cal EPA, Natural Resources Agency, CDFA, CARB, and Strategic Growth Council. And we went through a lot of modeling and metrics. And the goal at that time was a reduction of 15 to 20 million metric tons of CO2 by 2030. This January 19 draft was put on hold and it was going to be rolled into the scoping plan, which we're working on now. So hopefully you guys have this as a reference document. It has great information, great metrics, a lot of workshops, a lot of input. So we did kind of have the vision of the future back in 2019, and hopefully that can be rolled into the modeling. There's a great figure, figure 7, on the implementation of the acreage goal for the California Natural Climate Solutions with forestry, restoration, and agriculture, and compost application. And it has some really good metrics on how many acres per year. So this is a starting point on where you should model and not reinvent the carbon cycle, when we really do have a lot of good discussion with multi-agencies and stakeholders for a 2-year state collaboration. So I highly suggest you guys reach back into this document. And there's so many co-benefits that would help disadvantaged communities. The California Compost Coalition represents a lot of urban green waste, and for 1383 implementation, we need to get the organics out of the landfill for short-lived climate pollutants. And then that's a great co-benefit right there alone. But by making compost, most of the members of the California Compost Coalition were certified organic from the California Department of Food and Ag. So it were organic input, which has great reductions of pesticides and fertilizer when we go sustainable ag and regenerative ag. So the vision of the future, in order to kind of shine a light on compost application for the disadvantaged communities, is that we are going organic and reducing lots of pesticide and fertilizer use. I hope we reach back to the 2019 document and we use it wisely. Thank you.
This is Shelby Livingston. I'll give a quick response to that. In terms of the Natural Working Lands Implementation Plan, we are in fact utilizing the work that came out of that effort, particularly around the regional input that we received from the 8 regional workshops that were held, and as well as I think 2 or 3 regular workshops and 2 board hearings. And we received a lot of valuable input from that. We are very grateful for everyone who participated in that. And we are utilizing that to inform this effort, as well as a lot of more current efforts that have taken place since then, including the work being done by CDFA on their farmer rancher led solutions, as well as CNRA's efforts on the 30 by 30 and the climate smart strategy. So that collaborative spirit in which the National Working Lands Implementation Plan was developed continues and is being expanded on, all to help inform the scoping plan effort. So yeah, thank you for that.
Great, thank you. Next we have Chuck Mills. After that is Gary Hughes, and then Muriel Strand. Chuck, I've unmuted you.
Hey, thank you very much. Yeah, Chuck Mills, Senior Grants Administrator with Tree People in Los Angeles. Thank you for holding this workshop, this series of workshops, and for elevating the issue of natural working lands as a strategy to achieve these goals. Much appreciated. Really want to acknowledge and lift up Mr. Holmes' comments earlier with regard to urban forestry and his observations on engineered solutions. Really appreciate those observations and, as he called it, soapboxing. My question was that on the urban forestry, I think you classified it under settlements. you said that co-benefits were not going to be captured at this time, which I was puzzled by, given that the CARB methodology tool for urban forestry and grant programs explicitly has co-benefit modeling in there with regard to air pollution, energy savings, stormwater capture. So I just wanted to know if you could expand a little bit on that disconnect.
Hey, yeah, thanks for the question. So what you're referring to is a project level accounting tool to assess how one particular project can affect its place. And so what we have to do for the scoping plan is develop a model that would be statewide. And so when you go up in scale, just the science and the methods behind everything changes slightly. So I agree. I want to get to where we can also assess these co-benefits, because obviously there are a lot of them for having increased urban tree canopy cover. So we're trying to get there as fast as we can. Unfortunately, that particular tool that you're referring to won't work for our particular questions and our needs on the statewide level. So thanks.
Thanks.
Great, thank you, Chuck. Next we have Gary Hughes. You are unmuted.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, staff. My name is Gary Hughes. I work with the international organization Biofuel Watch. And I guess I just want to start by saying how absolutely challenging these meetings are. This is really nearly anti-democratic. It's very difficult to participate. And it's also really very disturbing that it's impossible to know who else is in the meeting, or especially even to know which state employees are in the meeting. So I'm very concerned about the process. I'm also, really concerned about a lot of the assumptions that are being put forth here. And essentially, it's our position, and after decades of working on forest issues in California, that there's a total crisis of forest governance in our state. And I think that this is exemplified, for instance, by the fact that on many instances at Jackson Demonstration State Forest, which is managed by CAL FIRE, the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, that on numerous timber harvest plans there, we've monitored this and we've identified flat out climate denial coming from CAL FIRE, basically denying the scientific consensus that human activities are causing climate change. Now, this is a crisis. Not only that, CAL FIRE has approved numerous timber harvest plans from Green Diamond Resource Company that includes almost identical climate denial language. So there's a total crisis of forest governance in our state right now. And I also feel like the presentations today, they need a little bit of a reality check. I'm going to use some data here from the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection from September that quantifies the number of acres that are being given exemptions and emergency notices for timber harvest. And in the year 2021, up to the September date when this was released, there were 1,700,000 acres of forest land in the state that had been granted exemptions and emergency notices by the state for logging. Now, interestingly enough, the state itself has done some monitoring of what happens with these emergency exemptions, and the state itself admits that more than 25% of the operations under these emergency exemptions are resulting in unacceptable damage to water resources. So again, this is a crisis in forest governance. Lastly, I want to bring up some more information that comes from the state itself regarding natural and working lands and the economic issues, and especially the social justice issues, because the state, in the California Department of Workforce Development study that was done with UC Berkeley, putting California on the high road, a jobs and climate action plan, is explicit in saying that investment in natural and working lands runs the risk of increasing poverty level jobs. there is a real issue with the fact that work in this field demonstrates characteristics of low road economic development with poor job quality and extreme social marginalization. And that's because the people who are doing this work are doing it for contractors who are often out of state, and many of the people who are doing this work are migrant workers. We're talking about the Piñeros. This is a massive demographic change over the last 2 decades at least in who's doing the work in California's forests. So the fact that there's such extreme social marginalization for the people who are doing wildfire prevention or thinning or biomass extraction for biomass energy, these are really serious issues that in these discussions around the scoping plan are not receiving the attention that they deserve. So that's all I have to say today. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thanks for all of that information and for your passion on the topic. I would ask, because it was so much information, please provide that in our public docket in a written form so we can fully absorb everything that you're telling us. So thanks. Alex?
Okay, we have Muriel Strand. You are unmuted.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Muriel Strand. I'm a retired air resources engineer, and I'd just like to hear generally about the models and about the reconciliation and verification of the models on an ongoing basis with empirical data. That's just my question, that's all.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, so because every model is made slightly differently, we have different sort of accuracy and verification, validation assessments. So for things like forest, rangeland, and shrubland, we're validating and assessing our model against things like flux towers, field plots, and satellite-derived variables, and that kind of goes actually for all of them. So yes, we are doing that as well. So I think for the sake of time, we are going to need to hold off on public comments. There's going to be another public comment period after our second segment. So right now, we are going to have a 5-minute break. Could we go to the next slide? And so I have 2:29, so let's go ahead and be back here at 2:34. Thanks. All right, welcome back, everyone. All right, so to start the second segment, I'd like to introduce Shelby Livingston, who will open up the scenarios discussion for us. Shelby manages the program operations section within the climate change program evaluation branch and has long been helping lead CARB's natural and working land efforts, so I'm sure a lot of you are already familiar with her. So Shelby, go ahead and take it away.
Great, thanks, Adam. So welcome back, everyone. I know that was a quick break and likely not long enough, but we appreciate you being back. For the second half of this workshop, we're going to focus on our draft alternative natural working land scenarios. The purpose of these scenarios is to assess the carbon and other impacts of various combinations of actions and changes to management given climate change. So in addition to carbon, these scenarios can assess the ecological, health, and economic outcomes. Each of the alternative scenarios that we will look at will include each of the natural working land types, so forest, ag lands, wetlands, etc. The scenarios are designed to assess carbon stock changes at 2030, 2035, and 2045. So as I think we all know, that's not a real substantially long period when we're talking about natural working lands, where we're really talking about decades before significant changes are seen in some of these land types. So while these are important years to assess for our broader scoping plan effort, we do acknowledge that lands sequester carbon and respond to management often on much longer timescales. So for this reason, we, where possible, may assess beyond these years. Next slide, please. Yeah, there we go. So I'm going to just quickly kind of, again, recap what's included in a scenario. So a scenario sets overarching objectives and then utilizes management strategies designed to fulfill those objectives. Management strategies, as Adam described earlier, are sets, or maybe it was Jason, anyhow, are sets of on-the-ground actions that we can take statewide. These strategies have to be designed before modeling can begin. So each natural working land type, forest, shrublands, and grasslands, as well as ownership and ecoregion, will have varying levels of management from scenario to scenario. CARB, as much as we would like to run every possible scenario, obviously we can't assess an infinite number of scenarios. So we have to be really intentional with the scenarios that we do develop. It's important to recognize that, as Adam mentioned earlier, we are not predetermining a carbon target and then designing a scenario to meet that target. Rather, we are first starting with objectives that we want to achieve from our lands and trying to balance our needs that California and the US has from these ecosystems, and then assessing the impact that the management strategy to achieve those objectives actually has. So even though management strategies will be designed to achieve various explicit objectives, CARB doesn't know, we don't know what the actual outcomes of these scenarios will be until after the modeling is complete. This is especially true for forests, shrublands, grasslands, and annual agriculture. Because the modeling is so dynamic under climate change, the ecosystem can react to management in unexpected ways, in ways that we possibly have not seen in the past due to climate change. Next slide, please. There we go. Nope, back one. There we go. So in just a moment, Adam is going to actually get into a whole lot of detail on some draft scenarios. But for ease of review, we've also posted a 2-page handout on our scoping plan website that details each of the draft scenarios. The content on the slide deck and the handout are the same. So the draft scenarios that have been developed here have been in response to public comment, stakeholder outreach, and through significant state and federal government collaboration. These are not the final scenarios, and no modeling has been done yet. What we're looking for is to receive feedback from you and to use these as kind of a way to spark discussion so that you understand what a scenario is, and to get your recommendations on these or any other scenarios that you may have in mind. CARB is also going to model a business as usual scenario in addition to these alternative scenarios. These alternative scenarios are really trying to lay out different visions of how Californian lands can be managed going into the future, focusing on how we can both fight climate change and live with climate change. So, I mean, we all recognize that climate change is already upon us, right? Here in California, we've seen the devastating effects. Many people have been exposed to some of the worst air quality ever encountered. Others have lost their homes, their livelihoods, even the places they hold sacred, and some even their lives, all because of climate change and the effects that it's having. As we develop various visions of the future, we recognize that each scenario will have trade-offs that can equate to real-world ramifications. And we definitely don't take this process lightly. As we go through these scenarios, please think about find the scenario where you think your vision of the future can be included, and let us know today in the public comment period or in our public docket how we can improve and build upon that scenario. And likewise, if none of the scenarios presented today meet your expectations, also please let us know that and lay out what you would like to see in an alternative scenario. Next slide, please. So at a very high level, we're going to jump into details, but this slide here is an overview table summarizing overarching objectives of 5 alternative scoping plan natural working land scenarios alongside our business as usual. The slides that are going to follow, Adam is going to go into much more depth, but as you can see here at a high level, the business as usual scenario, or the BAU, has no climate action. This scenario represents what would happen if management did not change from what we are doing during our baseline time period of 2001 to 2014. Alternative scenario number 1 has the objective to minimize disturbances and prioritize conservation and maximize carbon stocks by 2045. Alternative scenario number 2 prioritizes restoration and climate resilience. Alternative scenario 3 assesses what would happen if the state and federal government fulfill the recent commitments for land management. Alternative scenario 4 prioritizes wildfire reduction and complementary policies. And alternative scenario 5 prioritizes resource utilization of our natural and working lands. So again, that's just a high level. I'm going to hand this back to Adam, and he's going to explain in far more detail each one of these scenarios. Adam.
Thanks, Shelby. Okay, now I'll go into each scenario in more detail. However, as we do so, note that these are still high-level overviews of the objectives, and that more detailed management strategies will be developed to meet these high-level descriptions for each natural and working land category. Okay, so the first scenario, alternative scoping plan scenario number 1, minimize disturbances, prioritize conservation, and maximize near-term carbon stocks, so carbon stocks by 2045. In the table, you can see that each natural and working land type has a column, and within each column is a more targeted high-level description of the objectives of the scenario for that type. So in forests and shrublands, the objective is to have the most possible carbon stocks in the ecosystem by 2045. To accomplish this management strategy, the management strategy will eliminate clear cuts, not include any fuels management, increase afforestation, minimize or stop land use change out of forests and shrublands, and maximize fire suppression. In agricultural lands, the objective is to maximize soil carbon stocks and perennial biomass carbon. And to accomplish this, we will maximize the climate smart ag practices and nutrient cycling wherever feasible, and minimize conversion away from ag lands. In settlements, which includes both urban and rural areas, the objective is to have large increases in urban forest canopy cover and to have the legally feasible amount of defensible space in those WUI areas. Grasslands are to be conserved and restored in this scenario with no land use change. The objective for wetlands is to conserve them and to save soil organic carbon and to restore where feasible. And the objective in deserts is to minimize land use change. Okay, next slide. And again, for your review, we do have all of these scenarios posted on our workshop webpage so that you can follow them and look back on them as I'm going along. Now, alternative scenario 2 prioritizes restoration and climate resilience. So for forests and shrublands, the objective is to decrease fire severity and stabilize carbon stocks by 2045. This would include increased prescribed fire, thinning, and increased heterogeneous harvesting and management. Additionally, this would include more waste biomass available to potentially be utilized for advanced energy and/or wood products. Agricultural lands would see an increase in climate smart ag practices that are primarily focused on drought resilience. So this would include many of the same ag practices that actually maximize carbon, but special emphasis would be placed on those practices that include the highest drought resilience co-benefits. This scenario would also have low levels of conversion from ag lands, and it would also increase organic agriculture. In settlements, settlements would again have large increases in urban forests, and in WUI areas, now they would have the scientifically recommended amount of defensible space, which is defensible space, which is actually more defensible space than what's legally feasible. Grasslands will be conserved and restored with additional tree encroachment removal. Wetlands here are also the same as scenario 1 with priorities on conservation and restoration of wetlands. Deserts, conservation will be consistent with other sector goals and targets. Next slide, please. Scenario number 3, model a mix of strategies with current commitments and plans. So for forests and shrublands, this would include the million-acre strategy that is currently being developed with state and federal land management partners, the 30 by 30 strategy, the natural and working land implementation plan, like we were talking about during the public comment period before, amongst other plans around the state. Here we would also like to best align with local and regional plans. So if you are a regional or local level person here in this meeting, please distill your plan to the on the ground actions that your plans call for and send them to us in our public docket. Agricultural lands would see a moderate increase in climate smart ag practices compared to scenarios 1 and 2 that are and they would be primarily focused on biodiversity as a co-benefit and nutrient cycling. this scenario would also have low levels of conversion from ag lands. Settlements would have moderate increases in urban forests, and WUI areas will have the legally feasible defensible space. Grasslands would be conserved consistent with the 30 by 30 strategy and include actions also from the million acre strategy if they start to get into grasslands, and also the implementation plan. Wetlands here are the same as scenario 1 with priorities on conservation and restoration of wetlands. Deserts, again, will be conserved as consistent with goals and targets from other sectors. So the same as scenario number 2. Next slide, please. Scenario number 4, prioritize wildfire reduction with additional complementary policies. So for forests and shrublands, the objective here is to decrease wildfire activity and impacts above all else. This would involve maximizing fire suppression, large increases in fuel breaks and prescribed burning and thinning, and more heterogeneous land management. Agricultural lands would see a moderate increase in climate smart ag practices above the BAU, with little to no loss in agricultural lands. Also a moderate increase in organic ag is included in this scenario. Settlements would have moderate increases in urban forests, and WUI areas would have defensible space where scientifically recommended. So again, this is more defensible space than the legally feasible amount. Grasslands will be conserved and restored with an emphasis placed on wildfire risk reduction. And wetlands here are also the same as scenario 1 with priorities on conservation and restoration. Deserts, again, also conserved as consistent with goals and targets from other sectors. Next slide, please. And now scenario number 5, focused on resource utilization. So for this scenario, forest and shrublands, sustainable harvesting will expand, especially into those areas that traditionally have little commercial harvesting, which will inevitably lead to increased biomass available for a variety of uses, including in durable hardwood products. Agriculture will be the same as business as usual. Settlements will be the same as scenario 1, with a large increase in urban forest cover and the legally feasible defensible space amount. Grasslands will see a moderate level of conservation and management compared to the other scenarios. And wetlands and deserts will be the same as the BAU. Okay, so next slide. So now that I've explained our alternative scenarios, our draft alternative scenarios, I wanted to bring this slide back to show where the contents of this presentation fits into our overall target development process. So as you can see here, outlined in black, the modeling approach and draft scenarios included most of the process except for the mechanisms pathway development. And so the mechanisms pathway development identifies policies that may need to be implemented to achieve the desired scenario's outcomes. So that's not included yet in the scenarios. A focused discussion on mechanisms will come in 2022, informed by and in collaboration with other state agencies' efforts on mechanisms and policies. And at the beginning, as Amanda Hansen mentioned at the beginning of the workshop, much of the work is currently underway for the climate smart land strategy and also for 30 by 30 and Cal Nature. And the implementation of the California and US Forest Service Shared Stewardship Agreement, which leads to the 1 million acre strategy of treatments, and CDFA's work to identifying the farmer and rancher-led climate change solutions. Next slide, please. So in the end, when we've modeled all of the scenarios, so after we come up with final scenarios and then they finally get modeled, we are hoping to deliver something that looks kind of like this, but obviously with specific numbers. So here we have multiple alternative scenarios shown across the top, including the BAU, the business as usual, no action scenario. And for each scenario, we provide a suite of outcomes associated with that particular scenario, along with a narrative of the objectives and the management strategies and the mechanisms pathway to support achieving these outcomes. In this table, the arrows and circles show either an increase or a decrease or no change as compared to baseline values. And so as you can see, we fully expect that there will be trade-offs between carbon and other outcomes. And CARB staff will eventually recommend a particular scenario, taking into account stakeholder, partner, and public comments. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so now we'd like to open the floor again to our Environmental Justice Advisory Committee members for comments. So yeah, if you can raise your hand, we'll call on you.
Okay, I see Colin Miller has raised his hand. I've unmuted you, Colin. You can go ahead and unmute yourself and speak.
Thank you. Once again, good afternoon, everyone. I want to just thank all of my colleagues on the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee who have shared your thoughts and comments, as well as members of the public who shared your comments. Really appreciate that and learned a lot. Just building off of my comments from earlier, in terms of the need for meaningful representation of California Native people and indigenous tribal nations on the EJAC and in this process, I think it's really essential to build on that. We need to identify the importance in this process of a different kind of worldview where we adjust our social and economic practices to restore our natural ecosystem rather than seek to modify our natural ecosystem to meet the continued demands of an extractive, polluting, and unrestrained economy. And that in the agricultural sector, if implemented well, climate strategies on California's agricultural lands do have significant potential, not just for carbon sequestration, but also for public health, for water and air quality, for social equity and racial justice. And at the same time, the importance of direct emissions reductions to address the ongoing climate, environmental justice, and public health catastrophes that are caused by heavily polluting industries in our state cannot be overstated and must not be ignored in the scoping plan. California's efforts in dealing with agriculture's necessary role in emissions reduction and carbon sequestration has thus far been limited to a handful of incentive programs to varying degrees of success. And meanwhile, the human and environmental justice benefits and costs of such efforts have not been fully, accurately, or meaningfully evaluated. And false solutions, such as dairy digesters, carbon capture, utilization, and storage, flawed market mechanisms, and offset schemes distract time, resources, energy, and funding from seeking the real and intersectional solutions that will prioritize people over industries. want to acknowledge that we support a broad move towards agroecology, which practices include farming practices that would reduce synthetic pesticides and fertilizers, improve soil by growing cover crops, reducing tillage frequency and depth, increase crop and biological diversity, transition away from unsustainable livestock systems by phasing out confined animal feeding operations, increasing sustainable managed grazing and integrated crop and livestock systems, and that this is both a social movement, farming practice, and a scientific discipline that's embedded in roots of indigenous knowledge. So it's really essential that our state government not entertain technologies, including agriculture-related technologies that do not actually reduce emissions from current sources, and that will in fact incentivize emissions, such as dairy digesters. When demonstrated strategies to reduce and store significant greenhouse gas emissions through our agricultural and food systems are absent from the scoping plan's modeling so far. We want to strongly caution approaches like bioenergy with carbon capture and storage that use agricultural biomass for energy, given concerns about land use, water, combustion-related air pollution, and more. And furthermore, so-called nature-derived solutions in the scoping plan must not be combined or conflated with offset mechanisms, monetized reductions, or tradable emissions, which will certainly perpetuate continued greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere, as well as contribute to environmental injustice. Corporate carbon offsetting that allows companies to continue their emissions neither addresses climate change's root issues, continues to unequally harm communities near emission sources and facing climate impacts, and only delays and perverts our foremost and urgent task to reduce emissions now. Thank you.
Thanks, Colin. I appreciate the input, and we also look forward to working with members of the EJAC and also the working groups that they've established to talk through some of these issues as we design the scenarios here and get feedback on these. I'm going to ask Alex to see, is there any other members from the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee that has their hand up?
No, I do not see any other hands up.
Okay. So maybe what we do, and we can, obviously if anyone feels like they want to jump back in, we can always, of course, call on them. But maybe we go ahead and just move it to the public Q&A session. And I know that we had to cut the first segment short, so welcome folks to re-raise their hands if they have additional questions, either on the first segment or the second segment. Obviously, would love to get your feedback and questions on the draft scenarios. Recognize too that we did post those yesterday. It's going to take some folks some time to read through those, digest them, think about what kind of feedback you would like to provide to us, but happy to answer any questions or take comments at this time. So Alex, why don't you go ahead and kick us off on the commenters. Great.
Okay, we have 3 people so far. Catherine Dodd, you can go first, and then we'll have Bob Epstein and Shada Azamian. Catherine, I've unmuted you. You may need to unmute yourself before you speak.
Okay, this is Catherine Dodd. I'm representing the Californians for Pesticide Reform and families advocating for chemical and toxic safety. It's essential that CARB include organic farming in greenhouse gas reduction scenarios. And I listened carefully, and it seems as though there's a slight moderate increase in organic farming in option number 4. My question is, why, when some things are so easy to do, you only include them in one scenario? But I think it's important to point out that there have been hundreds of studies showing that organic farming, which prohibits the use of nearly all synthetic pesticides, is more effective than conventional farming, which uses synthetic chemicals. So it's organic is more effective at sequestering carbon and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I'm a registered nurse, and from a health perspective, as well as an environmental justice perspective, there are immediate benefits to frontline communities, and there are long-term benefits to the people eating the food that is grown. We know that many pesticides actually are obesogens, and we're plagued by an epidemic of diabetes. So I think one of my questions was, what health outcomes are you measuring, and where are you measuring them? Are they immediate, or are they downstream? And it's important to point out that many of the studies have failed, have identified flaws with the soil carbon studies in terms of the amount of sequestration, and they've ignored levels of carbon loss or sequestration at the subsurface level. Organic agricultural systems which avoid the use of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides have been found to significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions, with one study showing organic management to increase soil organic carbon by 36% after 12 years. This is a long-term investment in our future in terms of what we're growing, but it's a long-term investment in our future in terms of health and the health implications of continuing to allow pesticides to not only be put on our foods, but grow into our foods is somewhat unknown, but is known to an extent and is immeasurable. And I'm really hoping that organic farming will receive a greater emphasis in all of the scenarios, and I will take time to look at them. But it's kind of hard. I didn't realize they were posted yesterday, and frankly, I didn't have time to look at them between yesterday and today. What is the deadline for commenting through the portal is my other question. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for your comments. And I want to just recognize too the feedback that we've received, Catherine, from you and from others on pesticides thus far. And so I do want to say that in the scenarios, we included an increase in organic agriculture as part of the alternative 2, the draft alternative 2, which was prioritizing restoration and climate resilience, as well as alternative 4. And so encourage you all to take a look at those scenarios on the website. To respond to your last question, we have a public comment docket open until the 22nd of December for you all to look and provide feedback to us on the scenarios. And one of the things that we were evaluating as we were thinking about how to craft these alternative scenarios would be, what are the right mix of strategies in each of the different land types, the different management strategies, and what information do we have that we can feed into the models that Adam described earlier, and what does the literature say with respect to the carbon benefits for these different practices and strategies. And so, encourage, as you are thinking about comments, to submit to our comment dog to really, provide some of that additional scientific literature. We've gotten some thus far, and really appreciate it with respect to the organic agricultural effects, the effects of organic ag on soil carbon. Okay, next commenter.
Okay, next we have Bob Epstein, and then after that will be Shada Azamian and Jeannie Merrill. So Bob, I have unmuted you.
Okay, thank you very much. So Matt, I just want to say I am very encouraged by what you've presented today, the thoughtfulness of the overall scenarios and the approach you're taking. I have a specific question or advice that I'm looking for. So I'm an elected member of the Kirkwood Meadows Public Utility District. So we provide power at 8,000 feet in the Kirkwood area. We obviously narrowly escaped the Caldor fire. And while we provide now 100% renewable electricity for all of our customers, including the ski resort, we still have some propane, a lot of propane, that we're going to transition customers off of. We have been encouraging customers when we set up a program so they can offset their propane. Until they can get rid of their propane, we offer the option to offset using forestry offsets. And my question for you is, how do you, I realize those aren't part of the scoping plan in terms, because it's all voluntary, which ours is doing too, but are there best practices that communities can do voluntarily, and offsets play a role in that? Is there enough reserves in the offsets? So if the forest that we're supporting is affected, are the offsets, sorry for all the questions, are people who are providing offsets and doing, sort of a premium job of managing it, are they including the same sort of concepts you're encouraging in the forest management overall? So any advice you could provide, or including how communities can voluntarily exceed the plans, all of that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the comments. I'm going to kind of go back to one of the things that Adam was talking about earlier in the presentation, and that we've talked a little bit about, which is, at the stage we're at right now, we're looking at statewide, what are the carbon fluxes that we can model using these various tools, and crafting scenarios to be able to evaluate what those carbon stock changes will look like between now, 2035, 2045, and the end of the century. And so the types of things that you're talking about, like community scale actions that can be taken that will encourage carbon sequestration or result in it, or look at different levels of sequestration projects, that really comes into the mechanisms discussion. That comes into how do you make sure that the actions are happening that will get us towards the carbon targets that we're looking to set as part of the scoping plan. So I would say that, look to some of the work that the Natural Resources Agency is doing right now on the climate smart land strategy. We also look forward to having some future discussions on mechanisms. And so, right now at the point we're looking at feedback on crafting these scenarios that, for the state and for the forest sector will help us kind of inform what the forest sector could look like over the next few decades. Looks like Jeannie Merrill, I believe you are next.
I've unmuted you, Jeannie.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks very much. Really appreciate the presentation. I have a few questions and one request. On the question side of things, we certainly support the robust inclusion of the organic agriculture provisions. I'm with the California Climate and Agriculture Network, and we're a coalition of organic and sustainable agriculture groups. So glad to see organic agriculture will be part of the scenarios modeling. And related to that, I wanted to find out if we'll get any more detail about the kinds of climate smart agriculture practices, farming systems that you're planning to include in the scenarios. That's one question. Another is, I wasn't entirely clear from the description of the scenarios if you're including ag land conversion from sprawl development. As you probably well know, California loses about 50,000 acres of farmland every year on average, and about 40,000 acres of that is from urban conversion, often sprawl development, and wanted to better understand if that's also being proposed to be in the scenarios modeling. I saw the reference to change in land because of Sigma, but I wasn't sure about urban conversion. So that's my second question. And then lastly, my request, which is if you all could consider an extension on the public comment deadline. Currently, a December 22nd deadline will make it really tough for us to engage our science and technical advisors in helping to shape our comments to you all on the scenarios, and that would be unfortunate. So hoping that you would consider an extension to at least January 10th, get us through the holidays, and allow us to robustly respond to your good work here. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeannie. Appreciate the comments. Adam's going to want to jump in on some of the modeling specifics. As far as the timeline goes, we'll get into this in a little bit. What we're trying to do here is also make sure we get feedback in on the scenarios so that we can have some preliminary modeling results out for public discussion in the earlier part of 2022. So we want to be able to share some of these results out publicly once we land on the final scenarios, and then go and do the modeling work, which obviously takes us a fair bit of time. I think we might have an opportunity to look at the deadline again. So we'll go ahead and look back at that, and maybe we can have some follow-up conversations. I realize the timing is difficult. We were looking at this, trying to get the workshop out as quickly as possible and give folks time to give us feedback. With the holidays looming, that makes it a challenge. So totally appreciate that, and I think we can take a look at the timeline and see if we can adjust it. Adam?
Yeah. Okay, so you had two questions. The first one was about some more information about the types of ag practices that will be included in the different scenarios. And so that's what we're hoping to get some feedback on, actually. So we wanted to present here sort of what the objectives of the scenario would be, and we're hoping to get some more input on the different mix of actions that you all would think would fit those objectives, and in what amount, not just the actions, but how much of those actions. So, in general, we're thinking about all of the ag practices that are in the Healthy Soils program, for example, all of those practices that were highlighted in the implementation plan. Those are the sorts of things that we're thinking about. But also, if you have some new ideas also, we could look at those. Sprawl into ag lands, yes, so we are taking into account land use change, and most likely this will be done through the 4th climate assessment. During that exercise, the USGS, and I mentioned this earlier in the modeling section, they modeled future land use change, and we'll probably be using those projections of land use change at different levels to estimate what future impacts of sprawl could be on various land categories. So thanks.
Okay, thank you. Next we have Shada Azamian, sorry for mispronouncing your name. After that will be John Costantino, Josiah Hunt, and then Cedric Twite. Shada, I've unmuted you.
Thank you. It's Shada Azamian with the Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. Really, thank you so much for this presentation. I think we'll have to sit with this a little bit and want to send over more substantive feedback, but I did want to raise a lot of appreciation for what Colin had mentioned around the dangers of BECCS and of dairy digesters and the natural working land strategy. A question I have, that's probably my only substantive one for now, is if the strategies include the reduction of pesticides use and application in particular in any of the ag management strategies yet. And then two just process questions I have is our CARB staff looking at the comments that were submitted to CNRA's Climate Smart National Working Land Strategy? I think there's a lot of good guidance there from EJ organizations. And we submitted comments to that as well, but happy to forward. And then a second question on process is, I think it was said that each natural and working lands type would be incorporated into each alternative scenario. So I'm not really sure what that meant. I'm not sure if perhaps clarification on how the 5 scenarios that were presented today would be incorporated into the 4 draft scoping plan alternative scenarios that exist already, and how those work together would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Shada. All good questions and comments. So I'll try and take a couple of these, and some of my colleagues may also want to jump in too. So in terms of the work that CNRA is doing in the Climate Smart Land Strategy, we've been really close coordination with them, and the staff at CNRA have been sharing those comments. And we've been trying to get through as many of those as possible. We've also got our own comment dockets on there. So, if we've missed anything, I want to encourage you to just go ahead and resubmit it to our comment log, but we have been sharing our feedback across different agencies. as far as the modeling of pesticides directly, so within the model itself, right now what we're looking at is modeling different agricultural practices, and some portion of those may include practices that lead to organic certification. So we are not modeling reductions in pesticides directly. Instead, we are looking at the various ag practices that lead to additional soil carbon benefits, and we've included some options around modeling a certain percentage of organic agricultural increase throughout the state. So no to the direct pesticide modeling, but yes to some of the alternative practices that may actually help in terms of pesticide reduction. And then in terms of how these natural working land scenarios fit into the other modeling effort, the scenarios modeling that we are doing on the energy side. So we are moving these things forward, both modeling efforts simultaneously, or at least we're doing our best to do that, with the goal of being able to look at, in the natural working land space, what are the total emissions and or sequestration that is coming across all the land types based off of these 5 different scenarios that we could consider. And then on the energy modeling side, on the pathway side, moving forward on the 4 scenarios with a similar level of analysis going on to understand what the emissions are at various different endpoints, 2035, 2045, based on the scenario designs in the energy side. Right now, what we're trying to do is determine for natural working lands, what potential emissions remain or what potential sequestration will come from natural working lands under these different management strategies. We're going to have a public discussion about, which scenario is the preferred scenario for the natural working land side. That's going to be something that will go in front of our board in 2022 for discussion as well. And so there's obviously an interplay here, but what we want to make sure is happening on the natural working land side is that we are able to kind of model this independently, because we want to make sure that we are, as Adam mentioned early in the presentation, considering the balancing of natural working lands impacts and benefits on the ecological benefits like water, fire, and carbon. And so we are viewing this sector somewhat as a standalone sector that we need to understand what those emissions benefits and impacts are before making a decision on how that would impact the energy side. I don't know, Adam, if you wanted to jump in any more on the modeling question, feel free to hop on.
No, I think you got it. Thanks.
Thanks, Adam. All right, Alex, who do we have next?
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Next, we have John Costantino. You are unmuted.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Oh, great. Thanks. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, everybody, for hosting today. It's important to be talking about all this. I'm John Costantino, representing the Verified Emission Reduction Association, and mainly just have a comment about the mechanism pathway portion of this discussion and how important it is to have policies that are exportable, incent private capital, provide local benefits, co-benefits. And one thing that hits all those buttons is the current offset protocols that the state uses. They're very conservative. And so for every ton of carbon that's credited, there's 1 to 2 tons more, that is 2 to 1 maybe, that are actually reduced because of the way these things are designed. And the Offset Protocol Task Force has presented some additional ideas that could be a robust mechanism for reducing additional emissions in the natural working land sector. And so I don't really have a question as much as just want to support the mechanism pathway that provides all those benefits, and look forward to working on this in the future. Thank you.
Great, yeah, thank you for the comment. Alex, do we have some more hands raised?
Yes, we have see 3 other hands raised. So we have Josiah Hunt, Cedric Dwight, and Jerry Kent. And then after that, we'll address some of the written comments we've received. Josiah Hunt, you are unmuted. You may need to unmute yourself before you speak.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. Josiah Hunt here, founder and CEO of Pacific Biochar Benefit Corporation, producing biochar here in California from forestry residues, primarily from high fire hazard areas. Carbon credits are being registered from our biochar production. The biochar, after produced, is then applied in agricultural lands throughout California, including some that have been part of a Department of Water Resource Board long-term field trial showing really interesting information in water savings. So that's just a little bit of background there. So in 2018, the IPCC report, the special report on land and climate change, identified biochar as a critical natural solution for climate change mitigation and adaptation. And the projected greenhouse gas emission reduction total, noted as a carbon dioxide removal primarily, was up to 16% of total global annual emissions. So quite a significant wedge if utilized to scale. And then followed up in 2019 in the 2019 refinement to the 2006 National Greenhouse Gas Inventories with a biochar methodology for the National Greenhouse Gas Inventories. Biochar has also currently been recently adopted by the Healthy Soils Program under the demonstration type A. And I was just wondering what would be some of the necessary items to get ARB to consider biochar in some of the scoping plans for the natural working lands involved, could correspond partly with a thinning, forest management, and also with the ag lands management. And that's the primary question there.
Thanks for the question. Yeah, and I want to encourage you to submit comments on the scenarios. I think part of what we were trying to do in designing these 5 draft alternatives is to reflect that there'll be various levels of management happening, particularly on forest and other land types, and that in undertaking that management, there'll obviously be secondary effects of potential biomass availability. And so, what we need to be able to evaluate first and foremost are what are those changes in carbon stocks, and that's what kind of our models are designed to do at this point. So again, just encourage you to submit comments, and we'll take a look at those. I think Cedric is next, is right, Alex?
Yes. Cedric, you are now unmuted.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Cedric Twites here, Pacific Industries. Thanks for hosting another workshop. You guys have got quite a job ahead of you. Plenty of people to tick off. Anyways, good luck trying to keep a mix of happy faces and angry faces. I think that that one of the that really to solve this question is going to require mixed activities. At least to try to achieve the climate objectives that California wants to achieve. And so I think right now the process is challenged in knowing what balance the mix of activities that needs to be mixed in to optimize climate outcomes. And I don't think that that's a knowable value without first trying to put a value on the externalities, those secondary benefits that you're referring to, Matt, that are derived from some activities and can be derived in larger quantities from some activities than others, so that when policymakers are deciding what mix would best serve California, they can see those additional those values to understand where incentives and policies can be implemented to help secure those externalities. And I think immediately of the situation with biofuels in the forest. The forest right now is plagued with overly dense condition. The majority of that biomass is what you might call low grade or low value wood waste. But that low value wood waste will burn. It's not if, it's when. And knowing that the emissions profile is so much better when it's run through a state-of-the-art biofuels facility, understanding those externalities will help decision makers provide the incentives to get those really struggling industries off the ground. Bob Epstein wondered where he might find some replacement for propane. Well, in the best of all possible worlds, we're using low-grade wood waste to create renewable natural gas and not having it burn, and then us at either end of the Sacramento and San Joaquin Valley breathing that smoke. And it also will allow us to maybe not overprescribe natural or prescribed fire, because we live at the northern end of the Sacramento Valley, and I see the prescribed fire plumes come up and they raise above the mountains, and it looks great. The air quality's still good in the valley, and then it cools off overnight and it all settles up here in the northern part of the valley, and I'm sure that's the case down in San Joaquin. So, and I know that if that same material was pushed through a state-of-the-art biofuels facility, the black carbon would be reduced by 98%. The volatile organic compounds would be reduced in excess of 95%, etc. So, but how do you incentivize it? It's expensive, but there's real health benefits from utilizing that pathway as compared to prescribed fire. That said, prescribed fire will have a significant role in that mix because of the topography and administrative ownerships and a number of other things. Anyways, that's my point. I will write this all down again. One thing that is a struggle, and maybe at the very end I'll understand it, but it seems as though comments, and this may be, I've been commenting on this for, 5 years now, and it seems I have seen a bit of a change, but you don't know if you've been heard. So it's very challenging to continue to show up and voice concerns and then not feel like you're being heard. And I know you guys got to get on with it and all that good stuff, but and I'm not sure how you can satisfy that need of mine, but thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks, Cedric. I'm gonna apologize in advance because my wife just started a conference call right next to me. So if you get a little feedback in the background, again, apologies. So I'm gonna point out a couple of things here. First off, we did include in a couple of the alternatives a recognition that in certain situations you might have forest residues available for bioenergy or wood products as a result of some of the, or as an outcome, I should say, of some of the forest management strategies modeled in those practices. What we're going to do on the modeling here on the natural working land side, on the forest side, is try and model those mix of strategies that if that results in a certain amount of residues, there's still this question about what do you do with those residues, if anything. I will flag that we have been having a separate conversation with the Environmental Advisory Committee, and as part of the modeling on the energy side, about the role of biomass-based energy may play in various different pathways to carbon neutrality, and that would include both, bioenergy, biofuels, and kind of more advanced technologies, like you've mentioned in some of your comments. And so there is a discussion going on around the same things that you've talked about in the energy modeling side, and that will be part of this too, to be able to look at, one, on the natural working land side, what is the level of kind of forest management action, what would that result in, and then two, kind of on the energy side, is any of that uptake into energy or fuels. And you know, we actually just, I think yesterday, got feedback from our EJ advisory committee on the scenario designs on the energy side. So looking forward to kind of pouring through all that feedback and helping to craft what those energy scenarios look like and what the role of biomass-based fuels would be in those future pathways to carbon neutrality.
Okay, thank you. Next we have Jerry Kent. After this, we'll handle some of the written comments, and then Paul Mason, Christiana Darlington, and Asha Sharma, you'll be after we address some of the written comments. So Jerry, I've unmuted you.
Hey, I'm Jerry Kent from the Claremont Canyon Conservancy and the Oakland Fire Safe Council. Very interesting presentation today, very complex and detailed. A lot of information about fuel breaks and thinning and defensible space, but the thing that was missing for me was home hardening. The big issue today is embers igniting homes, and then there's obviously more fuel on the lot than there is on the vegetation. So would it be possible to add a home hardening element to your discussion?
Great. Yeah, thanks for the question. So the boundaries of natural and working lands is really at the ecosystems, right? So we are quantifying the carbon that's in the trees and the soil, plants. You know, if it grows, then we're trying to quantify that carbon and how it changes through time. And then the emissions associated with it if it burns or something like that. We would eventually like to get to the point where we can model how changes in forest management, defensible space then relate to structural emissions, but that sort of science, that kind of modeling doesn't currently exist yet. But that is somewhere where we want to be, but the short answer is no, we cannot include that yet, unfortunately. So, thanks.
Great, thank you. Okay, we have several questions that have been written to us. We can start going through some of them now. One is, does CARB actually know outcomes after modeling, or do they really just have predictions?
Yeah, so just as we said at the beginning, we don't know what the outcomes of the modeling will be yet, right? We're making our best guess as to the management strategies that will meet the desired outcome, right? So for one scenario, for example, scenario number one, maximize carbon stocks on the landscape by 2045. We are devising, and through your comments and through the help of others, trying to devise a management strategy that we think will maximize those carbon stocks. Or if scenario two, you know, reach climate resiliency and stabilize carbon stocks. We don't know exactly if the strategy that we put together is going to achieve those outcomes until after we model them. But just like in real life, you know, you set a target about what, not a target, but like a desired outcome that you want from your forest, for example. And then you have you and your forester develop a management strategy that hopefully gets you to that desired outcome. And we're doing the exact same thing here. We're devising these strategies and hopefully they get us to those desired outcomes. But we really don't know what the outcomes of the management will be until after we do the modeling. Because like we said, this is dynamic, complex modeling. And oftentimes the system reacts and interacts with management and climate in surprising ways. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Adam. We also have a question from Cindy Dawson. Will CARB put out a detailed technical support document on these modeling approaches to help folks with providing meaningful input?
Yes, so we will provide, yeah, all kinds of technical support documents. So we would hope to get the public feedback about the things that we've presented, you know, early so that we can develop those models and the methodology and then put that out. So we're hoping to get the public feedback about modeling and things now, so then we can make the models, develop the technical support document, and then put those out. So thanks.
Great, thanks. And we have a question from Catherine Dodd. What are the health outcomes that we will analyze?
So we're currently able to focus on the health impacts from wildfire emissions. So that's where the majority of our focus for health impacts currently are.
Great, and then from Muriel Strand, how many scenarios will be selected for modeling?
So yeah, we're gonna model all the scenarios that we develop. So just as Shelby said earlier, we can't model an infinite number of scenarios. And honestly, kind of what we've presented here, 5 alternative scenarios plus a BAU, is the max amount of scenarios that we can realistically model in our given time frame. So we're gonna model all of them, up to about 6.
Great, thank you. Okay, so now we'll go back to some of the raised hands. Paul Mason, you are next. I have unmuted you.
Hey, thanks. I appreciate the presentation. It's a challenging format, and I guess it's good to recognize and remember periodically that we're all muddling our way well into the second year of this pandemic. So I feel the challenge on all sides of trying to convey this information in this format. So I've got 2 questions, the first of which is really about sort of the structure of the model. And the piece that I'm still unclear about is sort of how time is built into the model. And this matters a lot in the forest context where, for example, we might go out and focus on thinning, let's say we're thinning a 30 or 40-year-old dense forest stand. You know, in 20 years, that's going to be kind of ideal for commercial harvest. Are we just assuming that it's going to stay on the same trajectory that, you know, we thinned it and we'll just grow it out indefinitely? Or are we assuming it's going to become harvested, you know, under sort of conventional practices, let's say clear cut? And then how do we incorporate, if we were applying some conservation tools there where we still have management, but are managing with a lighter touch and maintaining more carbon on the landscape? So sort of how do we deal with that time question in the model? Do you want to answer that question before I ask my second one?
No, go ahead and ask them.
Okay, the second one is really, and this is in the RESIS model for forest and shrubland, et cetera. So how geographically specific that modeling effort is, and how might that inform what's useful from us for comments? And this, I think, goes kind of to how can we be helpful here? I mean, is it more helpful to be, you know, saying we think there should be more uneven age management and more conservation broadly defined versus, you know, the headwaters of the Feather River above Oroville are going to be really important for water supply. We should focus in on maximizing resilience in that particular watershed. That's it.
Great, yeah. So yeah, I appreciate those questions. So how is time built into the model? So, you know, for forests, shrublands, grasslands, we model every single day of the year, essentially from 1850 to 2100. Really, we're trying to assess, you know, from 2001 you know, to 2045, that's really like where we're trying to target our assessment to, and then, you know, but we'll go a little further. As we said, we know things last longer. So, and you know, how do things like trees, you know, exist in this model through time? So, yeah, they grow through time. There are no assumptions. We make no predeterminations of how the tree is going to grow or die, but the model takes into things like climate, temperature, precipitation. And then as the tree grows, as it gets bigger, maybe it's more robust to drought, that's built into the model. But maybe drought occurs and maybe the drought's too long and then the tree dies, and that's also built into the model. So we don't tell it when to die, how to grow, anything like that. We parameterize how particular forest types function in terms of photosynthesis and respiration, how they utilize nutrients and water and things like that. And then we feed it climate, we feed it management, so we'll say, okay, in 1950, it gets cut down and then it's replanted. How does it grow? Based on, how it got managed and all of its neighbors. Okay, so that's the time. Oh, and then, management is also, it can happen any day that we want. And so our management model gets parameterized to fit in with what we've observed in the data about how things are modeled or managed. And then for scenarios, we can adjust that management. So we can say, do this particular type of harvesting more often, do it less often, make those bigger, make them smaller, do more prescribed burning, less prescribed burning, things like that. Okay, and the geographical question, this is great, and because, yeah, we do want, detailed information as people can provide by geography. So we've split up the state for modeling purposes into about 12 different regions. It doesn't really matter how you want to define your own regions, but if say, southern chaparral should be managed differently than, northern redwood forests, obviously we want to know that information, or even like foothill Sierra versus high Sierra versus like mid elevation Sierra, if you have different ideas about how all of those should be managed, and then also by ownership type. So whether the forest industry in northern Sierra should do things differently than forest industry in the Klamath or whatever. So you can break it down by geography and ownership type. So that's that question. Thanks.
Okay, I appreciate it. I'll just maybe close with echoing the comment that Jeannie made, that it's going to be tough to give you very substantive, useful information by the 20th of this month. And if we can carry that over to the beginning of January, you'll get more useful feedback from us, I think.
Okay, great. Thanks for the comment.
Great, thank you. Next we have Christiana Darlington, and then it will be Asha Sharma, John Kessler, and Mark Landgraf. Christiana, I've unmuted you.
Hi there, this is Christiana Darlington. I'm with Placer Air Pollution Control District today, and I wanted to just mention a couple of things. One is there is some research going on right now that's actually just wrapping up at CAL FIRE on the value of defensible space and also home hardening. I can forward that to you. So I just wanted to make sure there a bunch of work over the past year has been done relating to that, so it might be helpful for you. The other work that I'm aware of is there's a pile burn study that's going on right now relating to open pile burning in terms of prescribed fire as well as residential burning. And that project is funded by the Joint Institute for Wood Products, and it's ongoing, but we are giving an update just on the 14th. I'm on that team, and that is going to be a really big data set that you might also want to incorporate into your work. So just those two things are just for references for data, and I'll follow up with you separately on that. Then I wanted to specifically mention that a recommendation, which would be in your scenarios right now, it sounds like, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that you're considering the alternate use of biomass waste in scenarios 4 and 5, but I didn't hear you mention that in scenario 3. And I think that scenario 3, which is the implementation of several different state plans, would actually include some utilization of biomass for different types of purposes. And so I think that it's important that that is incorporated into scenario 3 as well as 4 and 5. So, and I'm not sure if I'm wrong on that or not, or if you were planning that, but I do think it is part of the state's approach right now. So I think that would be important. I also wanted to mention the health impacts from wildfire. There was I think it was the Institute for Science and Technology came out with a report last year, and maybe there was one in 2019 as well, but there's a lot of data holes in that information, and I'm curious if you're planning on filling those, and if what resources you may have to address the fact that we have a lack of data on that, a pretty significant lack of data that came out from recent reports. Hopefully you have some resources going towards that. And then finally, I would mention that the district is actually working on doing some black carbon research right now in terms of just collecting which studies have been done and what they conclude. And we have some like an ongoing effort with that, which I'm curious, and my question for you is, are you, like, to what extent are you including black carbon, whether it's, you know, from wildfire or not? Like, to what degree are you building in black carbon into all the different models? And then additionally, my other suggestion would be, I agree that you might want to let people see who's attending these meetings, like the Forest Management Task Force, you can see everyone. I think your software can let you do that, and it might make appease some people. So those are all my comments. If you don't mind filling me in on your black carbon sort of approach, that would be really interesting. And let me know if you have any questions about anything else I mentioned.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in real quickly. So what we're looking at right now is trying to assess what the emissions will be from the various fire intensity and return intervals that they get modeled through RESIS. And so I'm being a little bit vague because this is obviously challenging work. And so we have a contract right now, an existing contract through our research division that we're looking at trying to leverage to be able to analyze the emissions coming off of the modeled fires, and then also layer in a potentially a health analysis on those emissions. And so all of this would have to mean that the timing lines up from the perspective of us being able to get the RESIS modeling done, then be able to do the emissions analysis, and then be able to look at some of the health outputs. And so what I'd like to do is kind of like, you know, table that as a conversation for another day as we're moving that effort forward. And one of the tricky parts about this is also doing the speciation, so being able to figure out exactly what emissions are coming off of fire from different vegetative types. And one of the pieces of analysis would produce black carbon emissions associated with those fires. And so, you know, once we're able to kind of get this framework buttoned up, we would be able to potentially look at things like, you know, criteria pollutant emissions and particulate matter and black carbon and a number of other emissions coming off of fire. But it would mean all of this stuff kind of, you know, coming together at the right time. I don't know if there was I don't know, Adam, if you want to jump in, if there was another comment here that we should respond to.
No, I think you covered it.
Okay.
Thanks very much. Just Placer District will be, our APCO is very interested in following this, and we're definitely available for support. And I will follow up with you with those data sets that I mentioned.
Sorry, that was the other thing I was trying to recall there. Yes, it would be, I was going to encourage you to submit the data sets into the comment docket, or to give us to the point to where those are posted. That would be great.
All right, thank you. Next we have Asha Sharma, then John Ketzler, and Mark Landgraf. Asha, you are unmuted.
Great, thank you. This is Asha Sharma with Pesticide Action Network. Thank you so much for the opportunity to comment today and for presenting all of this information transparently. I'm encouraged to see organic agriculture being included in scenarios 2 and 4. Agriculture systems like organic and agroecology that reduce reliance on chemical inputs like pesticides not only have climate mitigation and adaptation benefits, but are critical to addressing the impacts that pesticides have on the health of communities across California, predominantly communities of color. However, it would also be a good fit, it would seem, for other scenarios presented today as well, like scenario 1 on maximizing carbon stocks and scenario 5 on resources conservation. So I wanted to recommend its consideration in these scenarios as well, and can follow up with more information. I also wanted to mention, I know from modeling how important it is what outcomes are being included in the model, and would really encourage emphasis on public health outcomes beyond just wildfire emissions, and also on outcomes looking specifically at equity and what certain scenarios would mean for communities of color, especially those bearing the brunt of the impacts of industrial agriculture. Agriculture is the predominant source of harmful pollution in many communities. It's also critical to include community participation in determining what outcomes are considered and how they're weighted. So my question is just, when will CARB have draft outcomes for comment? It looks like there's a slide on hypothetical outcomes, but I was unclear if this is the comment period for what outcomes should be considered in the modeling, or if that's coming later.
Oh yeah, thanks for the comment. I would say, yeah, if you have ideas about specific outcomes that you would like to see, yeah, please put them into our public docket, because you're right, you know, our models, depending on the model, especially things like RESIS, or our forest, shrubland, and grassland model, it can really produce hundreds of outputs. And so we can't really process all of that data. So we have to be pretty intentional about what we want to see. So if you have specific ideas about the outcomes that you'd like to see from specific modeling exercises, please submit those to the docket. When will we have outcomes? Yet to be seen, you know, so we need to get these scenarios firmed up, you know, through the public process and all of that. So that has to happen, and then we can start modeling, and you know, that'll be sometime next year. So thanks.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Next we have John Kessler and then Mark Landgraf. John, you are unmuted.
Thank you, and thank you all for your hard work and the presentation today and the openness of it. I mainly have 2 comments right now. I will be submitting written comments to the docket. I believe that of your scenarios, there are portions of each that are good options for this. I think a combination. My background is I'm a registered professional forester in California and a certified forester, and I'm not representing any industry. I'm representing myself as a professional forester. My biggest concern is with your options for forest and shrublands. We all acknowledge that past management practices, changes in fire management over the last century, climate change have had drastic impacts on how our forests are behaving right now. But the unacknowledged management activity is the last 30 years, where management has largely been eliminated from our public forests. And during that 30 years, we've been seeing wildfires increase in size and severity. And it looks to be a pretty steep curve continuing as we go forward. So I'm concerned with the proposed objectives in scenario 1, no fuel management increase, maximize fire suppression. Maximizing fire suppression and not treating fuels is a lot of what got us into the current situation. So I think we need to be really careful. I know there are individuals and groups who believe in hands-off, but I think that will lead to continued deforestation, and we'll never be able to catch up with the climate issues with that kind of goal or objective. And that's all for now. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment. So, you know, as we said, we drafted these scenarios to try to fit with all of the different comments, both publicly and from state and federal agencies that we got about different visions for the future. So, you know, we recognize not every scenario is going to meet everybody's vision. And so just as Shelby said when she introduced this section of the workshop, you know, find that one that meets your vision, where your vision can fit in, and then let us know in the public docket how to refine that particular scenario and why you may not like other scenarios and so on and so forth. So, but again, we really don't know the outcomes, the ecological, health, or economic outcomes until after the modeling is complete. So, thanks.
Yeah, I was going to make just a quick comment. I know we're bumping up against time here, and I think we're getting close to the end of our commenter list as well. So, but I really just wanted to encourage folks to also not think about these as like individual silos. You know, if you're looking at individual pieces of the alternatives, of different alternatives, and think they would fit into a different strategy or a different alternative to give us that feedback. And you know, really we're looking to kind of assess a range, right? Like we want to be able to assess kind of a range of different management actions and what that would mean for statewide carbon. And so trying to create that set of strategies in these alternatives and then be able to model those and then come back to you all with what those results show. And then we can have a discussion about what we see in those results, as Adam mentioned, you know, I think will be really helpful. I think, Alex, do we have one more commenter?
Yes, last one is Mark Landgraf. I've unmuted you. You may have to unmute yourself.
Hi, Mark Landgraf, Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority. Thanks, and sorry for pushing you over time here, but actually to your point just now, Matt, wanted to ask, since you know the different scenarios, they represent a wide variety of management actions, but may not exactly match the availability of resources and opportunities that can maximize carbon benefits, among other benefits, of course. And so wondering if, as the models are being run and the results produced, if we as members of the public will have access to the data for each of the outcomes under each of the natural and working land types for each of those management actions, so that, you know, for instance, if there's resources available locally from a municipal level or private philanthropy, we can also be acting on those management priorities that produce the greatest results.
Hey, yeah. So we're planning on providing all of our outputs, you know, that go into the assessments for public review. You know, this is not for us, this is for all of California. So yeah, additionally, probably some of this will get wrapped into some scientific publications or who knows. So yeah, point is people will be able to see the outcomes of our modeling. So.
Okay, thanks. I also wanted to emphasize, as Jeannie and one other speaker had before, that if there's an extension of the public comment period till early next year, that would be really helpful.
Okay. I think Jason was going to hop on. There he is.
Yeah, thanks. We did get one comment asking about the process for becoming a tribal representative on the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee. And I was going to see if Trish Johnson is on and can maybe walk through that process.
I think, Alex, you might need to unmute Trish too, just to make sure.
Yeah, thank you. Trish, I think you're on now.
Yeah, hi, this is Trish Johnson. I work for CARB in the Office of Environmental Justice, and I'm the staff liaison to the AB 32 Environmental Justice Advisory Committee. So I just want to thank everyone who has expressed interest. It's obviously a huge priority to CARB to bring a tribal member onto the committee. And we had put out an application process for this committee originally earlier this year. And so the application essentially included a one-page statement of interest, also a one-page resume or CV. We kind of assume you might have something existing, trying to make it an easy and streamlined process. And then the legislation that calls for the committee is AB 32, and it does ask for nominations from community-based organizations or environmental justice organizations. So we are asking for a nomination from an organization that's associated with a community, a nonprofit, or non-governmental related to environmental justice. So three items, and I will be following up with the individual that expressed interest. So thank you.
Okay, it looks like it's 4:04. I think we need to kind of wrap up here. I think we have one or two more slides on next steps. Adam, was that going to be you to walk through?
Yeah, you could do it.
That was nice delegation up. I appreciate that. So yes, we do have a comment docket up now for folks to be able to submit written comments. We have the current closing date on the 22nd. We're going to take back the feedback we got on extending the deadline and talk about what that means for our schedule. We just need to do some follow-up internally around kind of when we could have modeling results if we were to push this date back. So if we do move the date back, we'll send out a listserv notifying the new deadline for comments, and we'll shoot to do that no later than next week. So next slide, please. As with the remainder, the other workshops, we also just put forward the scoping plan schedule. So right now we are in that Q4 of 2021, and what we plan to do is produce modeling results on natural working lands based off of the final scenarios that we decide to model in Q1 of 2022. So we will be updating the scenario document that we have posted online, the draft scenario document, with a final version after we receive the comments and make adjustments to the scenario document, and then go and model those scenarios. Once we have the modeling results, we're obviously going to have another round of public engagement on what the draft modeling results show. And this is all in the run up to a release of a draft scoping plan in May 2022 and the first of two board hearings in June 2022. So the goal at that time is to produce a recommended pathway for carbon neutrality, and that would include natural working lands pathway to the board, get board feedback, and then have additional public meetings and workshops over the summer, and have a second board meeting in the winter of 2022 to propose a final scoping plan document. And again, just to kind of orient everybody, for this team on natural working lands, the goal is to develop a carbon target that is in response to the governor's executive order from last year that calls on CARB to develop a target for natural working lands in support of carbon neutrality. So that's what this team is working on. And then of course, this is fitting into the broader carbon neutrality planning work that the scoping plan is targeted at. I think that's it. Do we have any other slides? I think just the obligatory thank you, everybody, for spending your time. I know we're a few minutes over, and thank you for the comments and the written comments and the work on this. I want to thank the other agency partners. They were on the line listening into many of the questions and comments, and so CNRA, CDFA, CAL FIRE staff, I appreciate everybody's time and commitment to this process and the comments that we've gotten so far on the scenarios. I look forward to everybody's continued engagement on this, and really appreciate the staff at CARB who have put a lot of time into building what I think are really innovative and new modeling approaches that are going to really help us assess carbon neutrality and natural working land. So thank you, everybody, and we look forward to your written comments. Have a good afternoon.